Catelyn Stark drew a shallow breath in the bitter darkness, her lungs aflame with pain and her ears still ringing with the echoes of screams and the clash of steel. Cold stone pressed against her cheek, and the scent of mud and blood enveloped her like a suffocating shroud. Her fingers trembled as they sought purchase, scrabbling against the slick floor. She had no reason to believe she lived but for the burn of pain in her chest that assured her heart had not yet gone still. Somewhere above her, torches guttered in sconces, their light dancing ominously along the walls, casting long, flickering shadows. She remembered one moment from the chaos. The rush of men in fry colors, their blades flashing in lamplight, the music of the wedding turning sharp and sour. Roose Bolton's cold eyes, the weight of betrayal that had cleaved the night in two. She could still taste the tang of betrayal on her tongue, still see her son, her sweet, dear Rob, collapsing to his knees with arrows protruding from his back. And yet, she was here, breathing, battered beyond measure but alive. The air tasted stale and metallic, and it was all she could do not to retch at the memory of her last conscious moments. She had felt a blade across her throat, that final, merciless slash. She remembered the horror of it, the sensation of warm liquid pouring down her gown, soaking her hair, the heaviness in her head, a roaring flood that threatened to claim her. And then, an abrupt dimness, a silence, as if something had intervened. But she had fallen. She should be dead. The most rational part of her mind insisted she had died there, upon the filthy floor of the twins. But cold logic held no sway in the presence of her weak pulse, still beating. She rasped in a breath that tore at her throat and forced her eyes open. The corridor she found herself in was deserted. She could still hear remnants of the slaughter echoing somewhere far off, but this quiet place near the lower halls of the Frey's stronghold was almost a tomb. Her eyes moved in search of Rob's body. Her heart hammered in her chest at the memory, hoping by some cruel miracle he too might still be clinging to life. But she saw only bloodstains trailing off into the darkness, footprints of men who must have thought her finished, or who never cared to check if her lifeless form still drew breath. The Red Wedding was no wedding at all, but a vile butchery. Every vow spoken, every courtesy offered, every promise of safe passage had been a grotesque lie. Now they had left her. Perhaps they thought her corpse worthless, or perhaps they dared not search for more victims so close to dawn. Whatever the reason, it had given her the barest chance at survival. It took all her determination to fight the agony that racked her when she tried to move. The cut at her throat was shallow enough to allow her breath, but deep enough that speaking or swallowing sent spikes of pain through her entire body. She pressed a shaky hand to the wound, feeling the sticky warmth that told her it was still bleeding. Her mind drifted with shock and grief. She wanted to cry out, to call for her son or for any ally that might come. She wanted to curse the Freys, the Boltons, all of them, but she could barely manage a ragged exhalation. Catelyn closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of heartbreak. The image of Rob's last gaze, wide with confusion and betrayal, tore at her. The memory of Talisa carrying his child slain in the same onslaught twisted in her mind. There would be no more hopes for the North's independence under Rob's banner, no bright future for her family. She was alone. The seeds of her grief threatened to consume her. She forced the anguish aside for a moment. She had to survive. She had to find a way out of Walder Frey's cursed domain, if only to bear witness to the atrocity and to keep the names of the slain from being lost to time. And perhaps, if the gods allowed any measure of justice, she might one day see the heads of traitors spiked on the ramparts of Winterfell. She braced herself against the cold stone and pushed. Her arms shook so violently that she barely managed to sit up. The taste of copper lingered on her lips and her battered body felt unnaturally heavy. She gritted her teeth. "Steady yourself, Lady Stark. You have endured more grief than this." But a distant part of her mind mocked her with hollow laughter. She had lost her lord husband in King's Landing. Now, in the space of a single night, she had lost her son, his wife, his bannermen, and all the promise of a just victory over the Iron Throne. This was a monstrous betrayal reminiscent of the darkest tragedies old Nan used to whisper about in the halls of Winterfell. She had never imagined she would be forced to live through such a tale. The corridor stretched out, unlit beyond a few flickering torches. Old stones were slick with spilled wine, or so she hoped it was wine. The hush weighed on her. If she stayed here, she would surely be discovered come morning. She needed to move to find a place to hide or a path that might lead her away from this cursed fortress. Walder Frey would never willingly let her go if he learned she still lived. Survival meant finding help or stealing free into the night. She clutched the wound at her throat and stumbled forward. Pain lanced down her spine with every step, and the trembling in her legs threatened to buckle her. She reached for the wall, steadying herself, leaving a smeared palm print of blood behind. Her breath came in ragged, shallow pants. Step by step, she urged herself on, ignoring the frantic tempo of her heartbeat. A faint scuffling sound stopped her in her tracks. She froze, pressing her back to the cold wall, every nerve on edge. From around the corner, she could hear hurried footsteps and the muffled muttering of a man's voice. She hardly dared to breathe. If it was a Freyguard, she was finished. She had no weapon and little strength, and the slightest outcry would put an end to whatever slim chance she had at escape. With excruciating caution, she peered around the corner. A figure in a dark had crouched over a fallen body, rummaging through pouches. Catelyn recognized the corpse on the floor as one of the Northerners. He wore the Stark dire wolf badge. Her heart turned cold. She wondered if the hooded figure was a looter scavenging the dead for coins. With each second, she fought between the impulse to run and the desperate need for any help. Then she saw the figure tilt his head as if hearing something, and he rose swiftly. He half-turned, revealing a sliver of his face in the torch's glow. He was no Frey, nor was he a Bolton man. The shape of him was vaguely familiar, though she could not place where she might have seen him before. Her breath caught in her throat when he finally noticed her. His eyes were wide, flickering over her disheveled hair and the blood staining her garments. Slowly, carefully, he raised empty palms to show he meant no harm. Catelyn's nails dug into her palms as she resisted the urge to scream for him to stay away. "My lady," he whispered, his voice trembling as if seeing a ghost. "Gods be good, I never thought. You. How are you alive?" She could not answer. Her throat would not allow it, and her mind was too fraught to recall a name. He looked young, perhaps a squire or a minor retainer. He took a tentative step forward. In his other hand, Catelyn saw a small dagger, its blade flecked with gore. But he made no move to harm her. Something in his eyes reflected only alarm and pity. "Don't cry out," he said quietly, glancing down the corridor behind him. They're still searching above. We've got to get away, but the gates are heavily guarded. There might be a small boat by the outer wall. I saw some men try to flee that way. They didn't make it, but it might still be there." Catelyn tried to form words, but the cut across her throat punished her. She felt a warm trickle of fresh blood sliding down her chest. Panic threatened to seize her. If she could not speak, how could she navigate this place? How could she bargain for her life if cornered? She swallowed, a painful motion that seared her throat. Her vision blurred for a moment from the sting, but she managed a raspy whisper of thanks. The young man bowed his head as if to gather his courage. He looked half ready to bolt but stood firm. "We have no time. They could come at any moment. Lean on me." She hesitated. Trusting a stranger in these halls seemed like the worst folly she could conceive, but the alternative was to wander these corridors alone, unarmed and critically wounded, until she was found by the Freys. She nodded shakily, and he slid one arm around her, supporting her weight. They moved through the corridor, their steps echoing in eerie hush. Her senses, sharpened by fear, caught every faint noise that might herald discovery. They descended a short, twisting stairwell, passing a line of storerooms. The tang of damp straw lingered in the still air, and from behind one door, Catelyn could hear faint whimpers. She froze. Another survivor, perhaps, or a wounded man. But the young man shook his head fervently. "We can't," he murmured. "We mustn't stop. We won't get far if we try to save everyone." Her entire being rebelled at the callousness of the statement, yet some part of her recognized the truth. She could barely stand upright. They could not fight off a garrison of Frey soldiers. And if they lingered, it would be for naught. She forced herself to move on. She heard the door rattle behind her, an anguished moan, and then all was drowned by the sound of her own labored breathing. In time, they reached an outer corridor that overlooked a narrow yard. Through the high windows, she glimpsed the moon cloaked by tattered clouds. Torches sputtered along the walls, and in the courtyard below, Frey men guarded the main gates. Pools of congealed blood marred the ground. A handful of motionless bodies in stark colors lay there, half stripped by looters. Her stomach twisted with grief and fury. How could the gods allow this? Even after all the devastation she had seen, something in this final tableau of horror made her want to scream. The young man guided her away from the windows, his steps quick, gaze darting. They followed the corridor to a small postern door. The wood was old, and a heavy iron bolt was drawn across it. Her companion eased the bolt free with excruciating slowness. The door creaked open to reveal a dark walkway pressed against the inner wall of the fortress, overlooking the rushing waters of the Trident. The smell of cold river air assailed her, bracing and strangely invigorating. She squinted, straining to see if any boat rocked below them. The starlight revealed a small skiff moored to a narrow dock. A silhouette of at least one guard paced along the walkway between them and the steps down. Catelyn's pulse hammered. She could feel her companion's grip tighten on her arm. They exchanged a glance. She recalled the dagger in his hand, but she could not guess if he was skilled enough to dispatch a guard without noise. They had no better plan, so they inched forward. The guard turned at the sound of the door's faint creak. Too late, Catelyn and the young man realized they were caught. He raised his crossbow, fumbling to load the bolt, shock plane on his features. Before he could cry out, her savior lunged, burying the dagger in the guard's ribs. A strangled gurgle escaped the man's lips as he collapsed. The impact nearly dragged Catelyn's companion down with him. She steadied him as best she could with her shaking limbs. He retrieved his dagger, hands slick with blood, eyes wide in near panic. "Go," he gasped. "Hurry." They stumbled down a narrow flight of steps, the wood creaking beneath them. Each step sent fiery pain lancing through Catelyn's throat, but she forced herself to continue. The boat bobbed against the dock, only a single rope securing it to a rusted post. The night wind swept her hair about her face, and she caught the damp smell of algae along the water's edge. She would have almost felt relief if not for the horrors behind them. They slipped into the skiff, Catelyn nearly collapsing in the bow as the young man hurried to untie the rope. She tried to hold in any sound of pain, but the motion of the small boat caused her to inhale sharply, her throat throbbing. He managed to free the boat, then took up a pair of oars, looking to her. "We'll follow the current. It might be dangerous, but we have no choice." She nodded, bracing her body against the hull as best she could. The river's current seized them, carrying them swiftly away from the twins and the carnage. She saw torchlight flicker along the fortress walls. Shouts rang out behind them, faint and distant, but clearly alarmed. Whether it was a general alarm or a belated discovery of the survivors, she could not tell. She could only pray they were beyond any crossbow's reach in the darkness. In the uncertainty of that cold night, Catelyn surrendered to her wounds and exhaustion. Her companion rode for what felt like hours, the bleak stretch of river unfolding before them like a black ribbon. She closed her eyes, letting her mind swirl with memories of her children. She pictured Sansa, her sweet, gentle daughter in King's Landing, lost among lions. Arya, rebellious and fierce, lost somewhere in the war-torn countryside. Bran and Rickon, who had vanished from Winterfell. And Robb, dear Robb, the king in the north who lay dead in the twins, betrayed by men he trusted. She felt a desperate need to survive, if only to find her daughters, to cling to what little remained of her once great family. The wind blew cold, stinging the open wound at her neck, and she let the blackness claim her once more. She woke at dawn, covered in a rough cloak that reeked of old sweat. The boat had pulled up along a muddy bank somewhere far from the twins. Mist clung to the surface of the river, and the sky glowed a pale gray as morning broke. Her savior knelt by the water's edge, scanning the trees. He turned at the sound of her stirring, relief brightening his eyes. "My lady," he whispered. "I feared you wouldn't wake." Catelyn tried to speak, but her voice was reduced to a croak. Her throat felt raw, like an open wound rubbed with salt. She managed the barest rasp. "Your name?" He swallowed. "Derek. I served Lord Umber originally. But after the betrayal, he faltered, eyes clouding with the memory of what he witnessed." She nodded, grateful for any ally in that moment. Her mind drifted to practical considerations. She was wounded and far from any friendly stronghold. Derek was no maester. If her wound festered, she might yet die in the wilderness. She needed warmth, bandages, proper food. Most of all, she needed somewhere safe, though such places were in short supply since the slaughter of the northern host. Walder Frey would have sent ravens to Roose Bolton, to Tywin Lannister, informing them of their hideous victory. Even if they did not know she still lived, the roads would be rife with men eager to capture any wandering northerner for coin or favor. She attempted to rise, stifling a cry of pain that clawed at her battered throat. Derek rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. They made their way up the bank, searching for cover among the sparse woodlands that lined the river. The spring foliage offered some concealment. The dew-damp ground soaked into their boots, and brambles scratched their ankles. Each step sent a jolt of pain through Catelyn. She pressed a bloody scrap of cloth to her neck, a piece of Derek's own shirt that he had used to try and stanch the bleeding. It was not enough. She felt nauseous and weak, her skin clammy. It became obvious by midday that she could not travel far in her condition. Derek found a small clearing beneath a half-fallen oak, its hollow trunk large enough to crawl into if they both crouched. The space reeked of damp rot, and centipedes skittered away at their approach, but it would hide them from any casual passerby. Derek helped Catelyn settle against the trunk, letting her rest on a makeshift bed of leaves and moss. She drifted in and out of consciousness, half senseless with pain. She did not know how long she lay there. In moments of fitful awareness, she glimpsed Derek quietly roaming the edges of the clearing, collecting firewood, searching for something edible. She heard him muttering to himself, cursing the day he was born. She felt the faint stirrings of gratitude. Without him, she would have bled to death on the floor of the twins. When the sun sank low, the sky streaked with orange and purple, Derek returned to the hollow, a small brace of rabbits dangling from his belt. Catelyn tried to speak, to thank him, but managed only a whisper. Still, he understood. He built a tiny, smokeless fire, carefully shielding it with stones so as not to attract unwanted eyes. The savory smell of roasting meat swam through Catelyn's mind, stirring a faint hunger. She was too weak to eat more than a little, though Derek insisted she try. The warm broth soothed her parched throat just enough to ease the searing pain. Each swallow was a trial, but she forced herself to endure it, mindful that nourishment might keep her alive. That night, she lay against the tree trunk, listening to the wind in the branches, the crackle of the small fire, and Derek's uneasy breathing. Memories assaulted her, the wedding feast turning into a bloodbath, the laughter of Walder Frye and the icy stare of Roose Bolton, the black crossbow bolts arcing into the northern loyalists, the music that had twisted into a murderous coda. She remembered clinging to Rob's arm, pleading with the phrase for mercy, recalling the old man's smug grin. She remembered seeing her son slump to the ground, his body riddled with arrows. The tidal wave of emotion threatened to crush her again. She had failed to protect him. Guilt gnawed at her heart. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back tears. Morning would come, but for now she had to live. She woke to a pale dawn and found Derek gone. Fear shot through her. Had he abandoned her? But she forced herself to be calm, listening for any sounds of approach. Presently, she heard footsteps in the undergrowth and saw him returning, breathing heavily, a small satchel under his arm. He crouched beside her, showing his find, some wild herbs, a few mushrooms he claimed were safe to eat, and a scrap of cloth he must have torn from a scarecrow in a distant field. Maester's bandages would be better, but this might help, he said, fumbling with the fabric. Carefully, he helped Catelyn wrap it around her neck, though it offered scant relief. The bleeding had slowed, though the wound was sticky with half-dried blood and likely needed more thorough cleaning. She winced as he tightened the makeshift bandage, and he murmured an apology. They shared a few bites of mushroom and a sip of water from the river, boiled in a hollowed-out piece of wood. It was hardly a feast, but it kept them going. Derek wore a haunted look in his eyes. Finally, he spoke the question that had burned in both their minds. "What do we do next, my lady?" Catelyn tried to answer, but speech was impossible without a surge of agony. She shook her head, frustration welling. She wished for parchment or the strength to speak. She had neither. Instead, she raised her hand in a halting gesture, bidding him wait. Slowly, she used her fingers to spell out letters in the dirt, G-O-N-O-R-H. He stared at the makeshift message, frowning. "North," he whispered. "We could try. But the Boltons hold the Dread Fort. Winterfell is in ruins. And the phrase, they may have patrols SC. Ouring the neck. Word has no doubt spread. The Lannisters will watch every road, every pass. Is there anywhere safe for us in the north?" She grimaced. It was true. The downfall of the Stark forces meant the north was at the mercy of Bolton treachery. Yet she could think of no place else to go. If Sansa was still in King's Landing, she was beyond her mother's immediate reach. Arya, she might be anywhere or nowhere. Catelyn's sister Lisa was in the Eyrie, but Lisa had always been a volatile ally, and the Vale was not easily entered without invitation. Still, returning to her home region gave Catelyn at least the faint hope of finding allies among the smaller houses, those who might still be loyal to the memory of Ned Stark. Or perhaps she might vanish into the dense wilderness, biding her time until a chance for retribution emerged. To stay south was a death sentence. The next few days were a harrowing journey. They traveled by night, resting by day in whatever shelter they could find. Derek acquired an old donkey from a small farmstead he came across, paying with a few coins he had taken off a Frye soldier's body. The donkey was thin, but it saved Catelyn from the worst of walking. She rode slumped over the creature's back, numb with pain and feverish from infection. Derek did his best to care for her, boiling water to clean the wound whenever they camped. She managed to croak out the barest words from time to time, but mostly relied on gestures or writing letters in dirt or on scraps of bark. Her mind drifted in and out of nightmares, images of the Red Wedding colliding with memories of Winterfell. She dreamed of Ned, his voice warm in her ear, telling her to be strong for the children. She dreamed of Robb, a boy of 6, chasing Arya through the snow, begging her to yield. She woke each time with tears in her eyes and a raw ache in her heart, the wound at her throat pulsing in tandem with her anguish. Derek guided them northward, avoiding major roads. Occasionally they encountered small folk who had not yet heard the news or who were too terrified to question them. A handful recognized the sigil on Derek's battered cloak or the look of ladyship on Catelyn's pale face, but none dared to interfere. For those who asked, he told them they were refugees from the war, nothing more. They changed their story often. And the further north they traveled, the sparser the population became. Weeks passed in this grueling manner. Catelyn felt the fever grow, threatened to consume her, but Derek's care kept her tethered to life. Her wound slowly began to close, though her voice remained rasping and weak. Every swallow reminded her of the vile betrayal that had nearly killed her. At times, she wondered if the gods had let her live simply to prolong her suffering. But the memory of her children, scattered to the winds or imprisoned, pushed her onward. She clung to the slender thread of hope that she might find Arya or at least discover some means to free Sansa from the Lannisters. Revenge against the Freys and Boltons simmered in her heart, but that was a distant dream. She would sooner save what remained of her children than chase vengeance. Or so she tried to convince herself when the thirst for justice became too strong. They reached the outskirts of the Neck, a treacherous maze of swamps and bogs that divided the north from the Riverlands. The donkey died of exhaustion on one of the narrow causeways, collapsing with a piteous bray. Derek was forced to leave the carcass behind, though its stench would likely attract bog devils or worse. Catelyn and Derek proceeded on foot, picking their way across uncertain ground. Great moss-laden trees shrouded them and the air was thick with mosquitoes. Still, they pressed on, for rumors said that House Reed remained loyal to the Starks, though seldom did they show themselves to outsiders. How many Starks had traveled these causeways in ages past? The thought gave Catelyn a small spark of comfort. It was near dusk when they found themselves on a half-submerged path, precariously balancing to avoid knee-high water. The sun painted the horizon a dull red, sending long shadows across the marsh. Derek stopped abruptly, scanning the perimeter with narrowed eyes. "We're being watched," he breathed. Catelyn felt the hairs on her neck rise. She could see no one in the dim light, but she trusted his instincts. The crickets and frogs had gone suddenly silent. Then, with the softest whisper of leaves, a trio of figures emerged from the shadows. Each wore green and brown mottled cloaks that blended almost seamlessly with the swamp. They had small bows trained on Derek and Catelyn, arrows notched and ready. One figure stepped forward, a reed mask covering her face except for dark eyes that flicked over them appraisingly. "You should not be here," the masked woman said in a low voice. "These lands belong to the Crannogmen. Strangers are unwelcome. Speak your business." Derek raised his empty hands. We mean no harm. We seek safe passage. My lady here was a..." He faltered, uncertain how to proceed. The masked woman looked to Catelyn, who tried to stand as tall as her weakened state allowed. Her voice emerged as a whisper, but she forced it out. "I am Catelyn Stark." She pressed a hand to her chest as if that might confirm her identity. "I beg your aid." The masked woman stiffened. A murmur spread among her companions. One lowered his bow, the other remained steady. The leader peeled back her mask, revealing a face of wiry determination, her hair braided in a crown. "Catelyn Stark," she repeated, disbelief warring with caution. "Tales say you died at the Twins." The phrase butchered the young wolf and his bannermen. Catelyn suppressed the tremor in her chest at that painful memory. "I survived," she managed. "Just barely. Please, help me." A look of somber respect flickered across the Crannogwoman's face. "We have heard rumor of the Red Wedding's treachery. If you truly are Lady Stark, you have suffered more than any mother should. Our Lord Howland Reed once fought beside Eddard Stark. We will take you to Greywater Watch." Relief seeped into Catelyn's bones, though she felt only a distant gratitude. At least House Reed might offer some measure of protection. She realized this was a turning point. If she could gain the help of the Crannogmen, perhaps she could learn of any pockets of northern resistance. Perhaps she could find a path forward, a reason to go on beyond her grief. She bowed her head in what she hoped was a gesture of respect, choking back tears that threatened to surface. The masked woman gestured for her companions to stand down, and they beckoned for Catelyn and Derek to follow them into the swamp's deeper recesses. They traveled under cover of night, winding along secret trails that only the Crannogmen knew, through glades thick with cypress and weeping willows. Lanterns dappled the water with pale light, and in the distance, Catelyn could hear the hiss and rustle of countless creatures. The Crannogmen moved with practiced stealth, their feet scarcely making a sound on the soggy ground, while Derek and Catelyn stumbled in their wake. Yet they were never chided or left behind. The Crannogwoman who had spoken first offered Catelyn an arm when she faltered, showing a quiet compassion. In time, they reached a low causeway that snaked to an island, or at least what appeared to be an island. Within the gloom, Catelyn saw structures of wood and tall reeds, half camouflaged by the swamp. This was Greywater Watch, or so she hoped. She had heard the keep was said to move, to never appear in the same place twice, shielded by magic or cunning illusions. She did not know if the stories were true, but the strangeness of this fortress felt like walking into a half-forgotten dream. She was led inside a broad, circular hall fashioned of timber, the walls adorned with woven reeds and the heads of large fish. Several men and women in mottled cloaks rose at their entrance, hands drifting to weapons. But the masked woman, who removed her mask fully now that they were among kin, spoke quickly. "Stand down. She is who she claims. She is the Lady of Winterfell, mother of Robb Stark." A hush fell over them. Catelyn could see uncertainty in their eyes, likely fueled by the knowledge that Robb was dead. A tall man in a simple green surcoat stepped forward, brow furrowed. He offered a curt bow. "My lady, I am Jojen Reed's uncle," said Reed. "My lord brother Howland is away, traveling the deeper swamps. He will want to hear of your arrival as soon as we can find him." Catelyn's voice shook as she responded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I am in need of a maester, or any help you can give." His gaze softened as he took in her pallid face and the blood-stained bandage at her throat. "We have healers among us. You will have care and safety here for as long as we can provide it. The Freys dare not step foot onto our lands in large numbers. Their horses sink in our mud and their crossbows do little good in these twisting paths. Rest, my lady. We shall see to you." Despite the faint flicker of safety those words provided, Catelyn could not banish the haunting images of the Red Wedding from her mind. She allowed herself to be guided to a small chamber lined with warm furs. A Crannogwoman with gentle hands helped her remove her filthy clothes, bathing her wound with water steeped in certain swamp herbs that smelled pungent but soothing. When the herbal wash touched her skin, the sting was fierce and she clenched her jaw, letting out a strangled hiss. But after a moment, a cool numbness settled in, easing the pain. She was bandaged again, this time with proper ointments. They made her drink a bitter tea that tasted of moss and earth, which lulled her into a heavy, dreamless sleep. The next morning, she woke with less pain, though her throat still felt raw. She could swallow with more ease, and for once she felt a faint trickle of strength return to her limbs. Derek was allowed into the chamber, relief etched into his face. He said the Crannogmen had fed him well and that they appeared eager to help. The mere fact that her companion had not been cast out or slain spoke to the Reed's sense of honor. For that, Catelyn was profoundly thankful. Days passed in Greywater Watch, though time felt fluid in this strange domain. Mists drifted through the swamps, and each sunrise seemed to come with its own sense of timelessness. Catelyn spent most of her hours resting and recovering under the watchful eyes of the healers. They forced her to drink more bitter concoctions to keep the wound clean, to move about gently so her muscles would not atrophy. In hushed conversations, Sedge Reed explained the precarious state of the North. Word had reached them of Roose Bolton's alliance with the Lannisters, of his new title as Warden of the North, and of the complete devastation of the Stark cause. White Harbor had not yet openly declared support for Bolton, but they were isolated. The Manderleys might resist, but they would be cautious in the face of King's Landing's might. Catelyn listened, her heart aching with every revelation. Though physically she was mending, her spirit felt as tattered as ever. She thought often of Rickon and Bran, believed dead by some, though she had never seen their bodies. Was there still hope that her two youngest sons lived? She thought of Arya, likely lost in the Riverlands or possibly dead. She prayed for her children day and night, trusting the old gods to watch over them when she could not. At last, after what felt like a fortnight but might have been more, Howland Reed returned. Catelyn was in the main hall when he arrived, flanked by half a dozen Crannogmen. He was a lean, weathered man with keen eyes that glinted with intelligence. A short beard and strands of gray in his brown hair gave him a look of quiet wisdom. He bowed low to her in greeting, his voice calm yet weighted with sorrow. "My lady, you have endured a tragedy that no mother should ever bear. I mourn with you for Lord Rob and all we lost." She tried to speak more forcefully, finding that she could manage short sentences, though still soft and hoarse. "Lord Reed," she said. "Thank you for sheltering me." He waved aside the thanks. "Your husband saved my life at the Tower of Joy. He was more than a lord to me, he was a friend and comrade. I shall not forget that debt, nor the debts owed to the Stark name. Now, it appears the lords of the South forget their honor. But we Crannogmen remember. We will never kneel to the Freys or the Boltons." Something in his tone rekindled a faint spark in Catelyn's chest. The Reeds might be a small house, little in the way of knights or large armies, but their loyalty was fierce. I want to fight," she rasped. "I want to do right by my children. But I do not see a way." Howland nodded gravely. "The North is a wounded beast. But a wounded beast, when cornered, can be more dangerous than ever. There are still pockets of resistance. The mountain clans, some of the smaller houses like the Glovers, the Mormonts, the Serwins, they may bend the knee publicly, but their hearts are not with the Boltons. The Karstarks are divided among themselves after Lord Rickard was executed for treason against Robb. White Harbor is wary. Perhaps, with time, they might rally anew. But for now, the Bolton men swarm Winterfell and the Iron Throne garrisons Moat Cailin, blocking travel from the south. It is dangerous to move openly. Catelyn recalled the formidable castle of Moat Cailin, a natural chokehold on the route to the north. If the Boltons and Freys held it, they held the gateway to her ancestral lands. "What of my daughters?" she managed, voice trembling. "Have you heard any word of Sansa or Arya?" A flicker of sympathy crossed his face. "Some rumors suggest Sansa is still a captive in King's Landing. There were tales of her forced marriage to Tyrion Lannister, though the truth is muddled by rumor. As for Arya, some say she was seen in the Riverlands, others that she died. None can say for certain. The realm is overrun with outlaws and worse." Catelyn closed her eyes, swallowing the despair that welled within. I must find a way. They are my children." Howland Reed inclined his head. "I will help as I can. For now, rest. Gather your strength. In time, we may find an opportunity to strike or at least glean more information. There is no sense in riding out to certain death. We must be cunning like the Crannogmen who vanish into the swamps to ambush their foes." Though every fiber of her being screamed to hurry south, to break into the Red Keep and snatch her daughter from the lion's den, to scour the Riverlands for Arya, Catelyn knew she was too weak. She had no army, no resources, no allies save for a small band of loyal Crannogmen. With tears of frustration burning in her eyes, she nodded. She would have to bide her time. She remained in Greywater Watch, gradually healing. Her voice never recovered fully from the gash across her throat. Every word was tinged with a raspy husk that reminded her of how close she had come to death. Yet in the quiet corners of the hall, she could not help but dwell on the past. She imagined Robb's last breath, the terror that must have seized him. She wondered if any part of him had felt her love in that final moment. The Crannogmen did not speak of the Red Wedding often out of respect, but she could see the pity in their eyes. Catelyn's hair, once rich auburn, had streaks of silver that seemed to spread each day. She found new lines etched into her face when she glimpsed her reflection in the still waters outside the hall. Derek stayed with her, performing small tasks around Greywater Watch, though he was no Crannogman. He practiced with bow and spear under their tutelage, perhaps hoping to become a better guardian. He kept a quiet watch over Catelyn, always ready to defend her if needed. She found a sort of companionable solace in the young man, though she would never truly put aside the memory of the many who had died while she lived. By slow degrees, she began to stand straighter, to move about the fortress without aid. The healers insisted she not push herself, but she was determined to regain what vitality she could. Each day, she would practice walking the perimeter of the wooden ramparts, breathing in the swamp's dank air, letting the hush of the bog soothe her raw nerves. She found a modest peace in the frogs croaking, the rustle of reeds in the breeze. It was a world away from the polished corridors of Riverrun or the austere halls of Winterfell, but it was safe, and it allowed her to grieve in private. Weeks turned into a month and then another. She often met with Howland Reed, who shared any tidings brought by scouts or wandering minstrels. They heard word of King Joffrey's death by poison at his wedding feast, of Tywin Lannister's murder on the Privy, of Peter Baelish's machinations in the Vale. The realm was in chaos, but that chaos did not necessarily serve the North. Roose Bolton had been legitimized by the crown, his bastard son Ramsay too. They held Winterfell in a cold, merciless grip. The possibility of rallying the North behind a different banner seemed slim without a surviving Stark heir. Catelyn inwardly raged at the cruelty of the fates. She was alive, but the rightful heirs Bran, Rickon, Robb were all presumed dead, and Sansa and Arya were lost. One dusk, as the mist rolled in heavier than usual, Howland sent for her. She found him in the main hall, kneeling beside a crude map of the north and its surrounding territories carved onto a section of driftwood. Candles cast dancing shadows on his face. He gestured for her to sit. Derek stood behind her protectively, arms folded. "I have word," Howland said softly. "A band of outlaws calling themselves the Brothers Without Banners has been stirring unrest in the Riverlands. Some say they have a young girl traveling with them. She was rumored to be heading north at one point, though that path is uncertain." Catelyn's heart quickened. "Arya?" she whispered. "Possibly. If she were with these outlaws, we have no certainty of her fate. But the rumors are persistent that they carried a highborn girl." Catelyn shut her eyes, trying to calm the surge of hope that warred with dread. Arya had always been strong-willed, capable of surviving against odds. Perhaps it was truly her. If so, how could Catelyn reach her? The Riverlands were still under the watchful eye of the Freys. The roads were plagued by bandits and the remains of ravaged armies. Howland leaned forward. "I know a few safe paths through the Neck, as do my men. If this rumor is true, it may be worth sending a small party to search for her. But it would be perilous, especially if the Freys discover that Lady Catelyn Stark still lives. Their vengeance would be swift." Catelyn did not hesitate. I must go," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "She is my daughter. If she is still alive." Derek touched her arm gently. "My lady, let me go in your stead. You are still recovering. We cannot risk losing you, not now." She appreciated his concern, but her maternal instincts burned too fiercely. "I must see this through," she croaked. "She lost her father, her brother, her home. She needs me." Howland regarded her solemnly. "If that is your wish, I will not refuse you. But you must move in secrecy. A small escort, traveling quietly. My men can guide you through the hidden ways. Once you reach the Riverlands, you will have to rely on your wits." Catelyn's breath shook, but her resolve hardened. She had rested, grieved, and healed enough to stand on her own. If there was a chance Arya lived, she would not cling to safety while her daughter remained in peril. "When do we leave?" "On the morrow," Howland replied. "My men will ready a boat to take you along certain secret channels. Be wary of the Freys. They have not forgotten the death of their kin, nor do they show mercy. But if the old gods are just, you will find what you seek." That night, sleep eluded her. She paced the wooden corridors, ignoring the twinge in her throat, feeling the swirl of anxiety and anticipation in her gut. She had made a choice, one that might lead her back into the hands of her enemies or worse. But to remain in hiding while her child's fate hung in question felt like a betrayal of her own blood. Dawn broke at last, the swamp mists glowing silver in the early light. Derek and a handful of crannogmen prepared provisions and loaded them into two slender boats. Catelyn exchanged farewells with Howland Reed, bowing her head. "Thank you," she whispered, "for my life, for your loyalty." He bowed in turn. "The Reeds do not forget. Come back to us if you can, my lady, or send word if you find your daughter. The North remains your home, no matter who claims to rule it." With that, they pushed off into the water, the boats gliding over the mist-shrouded bog. The crannogmen guided them with long poles, navigating crooked channels that wove through half-submerged trees and tangles of reeds. The journey was eerily beautiful. Sunlight pierced through the canopy in hazy beams, illuminating the watery depths below. Fish darted beneath them, and occasionally, they glimpsed the lazy eyes of a crocodile or some other swamp creature lurking at the edges of sight. Yet the crannogmen were unafraid, confident in these waters. At nightfall, they made camp on small rises of firm ground, erecting low tents to keep off insects. They spoke little for fear of drawing unwanted attention. Each day carried them closer to the southern edges of the Neck. Catelyn found her mind drifting between worry for Arya and the memory of her many losses. At times, the fear that she would fail again, that she would find only another grave, threatened to unravel her. But she steeled herself, remembering how Arya had always been a survivor. She pictured her daughter's fierce gray eyes, the fearless way she had once asked to learn swordplay. Finally, they emerged from the deeper swamps into the narrower channels leading toward the Riverlands. The air grew a bit clearer, the water less brackish. They found a secluded cove to leave the boats and set foot on land. Here, Catelyn parted ways with most of the crannogmen, save for 2 who would serve as guides for a time. The rest would return to Greywater Watch, so as not to arouse suspicion by traveling in large numbers. They followed a forgotten road through dense forest, mindful of every rustle and bird call. The tension grew with each mile. The riverlands were still battered by war, the specter of the Freys looming over every holdfast. They passed burned-out villages, charred fields where crops had been set aflame. Gaunt peasants crouched in ditches, regarding them with hollow eyes. Derek and the crannogmen carried small game they hunted to trade for safe passage when needed, bartering for scraps of information about traveling parties or sightings of a girl resembling Arya Stark. Most folk had nothing to say or were too frightened to speak. One night, they found shelter in the ruins of a half-collapsed barn. Rain pounded the sagging roof as they huddled around a modest fire. Catelyn gazed into the flames, allowing the flicker of orange to lull her into a contemplative mood. She recalled the last time she had seen Arya. It was in King's Landing before Ned's execution. She had been so spirited, learning how to use a sword from Syrio Farrell. Catelyn had not understood her daughter's desire for such things, thinking her best suited to ladylike pursuits. Now she regretted not encouraging her more, for that skill might have been the only thing that kept Arya alive. The memory stung. As they pressed on, the rumors grew more frequent. Some spoke of a band of outlaws that robbed the rich, giving scraps to the poor, rumored to be led by a man who could not die, though those were likely just stories. Others mentioned seeing a girl with short hair, traveling under heavy guard, heading east. The swirl of contradictory tales was maddening. Catelyn's frustration grew, and exhaustion pulled at her. Yet she could not give in. Derek urged her to pace herself, to rest, but her resolve was unyielding. Then, one twilight near the ruins of an old sept, they found a man, half delirious from a festering wound, who claimed to have seen the Hound leading a young girl through the hills to the north. Catelyn's heart pounded at the mention of the Hound. She recalled Sandor Clegane's fearsome visage, his burned face, his unpredictability. But she also knew that Sansa had once trusted him in a strange way, believing he had a shred of decency. If the Hound truly traveled with Arya, how had that come to pass? They changed direction, following the old man's cryptic instructions. The days blurred into a relentless search. Each rumor they followed seemed to evaporate upon arrival. Catelyn felt a creeping despair. Then, late one evening, they stumbled across a narrow ravine where the remains of a campfire smoldered. Nearby lay the body of a man in battered armor. Catelyn's guides tensed, scanning the surroundings for signs of ambush. Derek crouched by the corpse, grimacing at the stench of fresh death. The man's gauntlets bore the sigil of House Clegane, though the Hound's head was nearly scratched away. Bloodstains led deeper into the ravine, as if someone had fled while wounded. They followed the trail, hearts pounding. At last, they found a small crevice sheltered by rocks. A shape lay there, half hidden by the gloom. Derek approached cautiously, sword drawn. He froze. "My lady," he whispered, glancing back. "It's him." Catelyn's breath caught. She moved closer, ignoring the pain in her throat, ignoring the fearful pounding in her chest. It was Sandor Clegane, the Hound, lying on his back, blood seeping from a terrible wound in his thigh. His face was ashen, eyes partially closed. She could see the burn scars that covered one side of his face, twisted and hideous. His chest rose and fell in ragged gasps. He seemed dimly aware of their presence. His lips curled in a painful sneer. "Come, to finish me?" he rasped, his voice nearly as broken as her own. Catelyn's mind reeled. Where's Arya?" she managed, her voice trembling. "The girl, she was with you?" He gave a bitter, choking laugh that turned into a coughing fit. "Gone. Ran off while we were set upon by outlaws. She left me here to die." His eyes flicked to Catelyn, not seeming to recognize her at first. Then something in his gaze shifted. You're dead." The mother, he laughed, a hollow sound. "I must be dreaming." Catelyn's heart hammered. Arya had escaped, then. Or so Sandor claimed. Where would she go? She pressed. "Which direction?" He groaned, pressing a hand to his bleeding thigh. "Like I'd know. She's wild as a feral cat. Wanted to find her mother, her brother, all dead." He coughed again, spitting blood. She left me with no mercy. Not even a quick end. Maybe she did me a kindness, letting me die on my own. Couldn't pay me the gold anyway. Catelyn knelt, ignoring Derek's wary look. She regarded Sandor's injuries. He was unlikely to survive without immediate care, and even then, the wound festered. She was swept by a swirl of emotions: revulsion, pity, anger, desperation. "Please," she whispered. "If you know anything that could help me find her." He stared at her with bleary eyes. A name. She was calling out for a ship to sail north or maybe across the narrow sea. She has a list of those she wants dead, you know. She's not the same little girl she once was. Catelyn felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted to weep, to rage against the cruelty of the world. But she forced herself to remain collected. Which way would she go? Sandor managed a shrug that turned into a grimace of pain. She might try for the coast. Or maybe she wanders the riverlands still. She never told me her plan, only that she'd see them dead. The phrase, "the Lannisters, she's made for killing," that one. A hush fell. Derek shifted uneasily, casting a glance at Catelyn. "My lady, we can't stay. If outlaws are near, or fry patrols." Sandor closed his eyes. "Leave me. Or kill me." His voice was so quiet she scarcely heard it over the wind rustling through the ravine. She hesitated. She thought of the many cruelties Sandor had done or threatened. But he had also saved Sansa once upon a time. And if Arya had traveled with him for any length of time, perhaps he had done something to protect her, too, in his own twisted way. The memory of the red wedding swelled in her mind, fueling a cold fury at the thought of letting another suffer a slow death. Mercy was all she had left to give. Catelyn touched Derek's arm. She drew the smaller of his two knives, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. She bent over Sandor, meeting his gaze. He did not flinch. Then she pressed the blade gently to his heart and pushed. He jerked, let out a final gasp, and then lay still, eyes open and unseeing. She exhaled a shuddering breath, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Derek bowed his head. "We should go, my lady." She nodded. They left Sandor Clegane's body beneath the rocks, a nameless cairn in the wilderness. As they emerged from the ravine, Catelyn's grief felt heavier. She had lost Arya's trail yet again, though at least she knew her daughter still lived. The knowledge offered a faint spark. She had not survived the twins merely to wallow in despair. She would press on. She would search every corner of the 7 kingdoms if she must. She had no illusions that Arya would be the same girl who once clung to Ned's leg, but she was still her daughter. And Catelyn would not rest until she knew Arya was safe or until she herself drew her last breath. That night, they made camp in a stand of willow trees by a trickling stream. The wind carried the scent of damp earth. Catelyn hunched by the fire, her bandaged throat throbbing in time with her heartbeat, a reminder of the brutal betrayal she had endured. The Red Wedding. Walder Frey. Roose Bolton. She remembered Robb's body falling, how her own lifeblood had spilled onto the filthy floor. And yet here she was, living on borrowed time, compelled by the faint hope that at least one child might be saved from the wreckage of their once proud house. She tilted her head back, gazing at the pale moon. She murmured a ragged prayer to the old gods, to the weirwoods, to Ned, to anyone who might listen. "Watch over my children," she whispered, forcing the words through her throat. "Give me strength to find them." At the edge of the firelight, Derek kept vigilant watch, a grim figure who had cast his lot with her. She felt a fleeting sense of gratitude for him, a stranger who'd bound his fate to hers. Tomorrow, they would move on, searching for any hint of Arya's presence, listening for rumors, ready to slip away whenever Frey men drew near. And if the gods were kind, one day they might find Arya. Or perhaps even Sansa. Or a sign that Bran or Rickon lived. The North was a land of resilient hearts and steadfast loyalties. Even though the Boltons now sat in Winterfell, even though the Freys claimed Riverrun, even though the Lannisters perched on the Iron Throne, Catelyn would not surrender. She let the tears come then, silent and hot, tracing lines down her cheeks as she stared into the shadows beyond the fire. The night offered no answers, only a quiet acceptance of her sorrow. But within that sorrow there was a glimmer of fierce, unbreakable resolve. She had survived the Red Wedding, the greatest betrayal of the age. She would not bow, she would not break. There was still a chance, slim though it might be, that House Stark would endure. That chance was all she had, and she would cling to it with every fiber of her being. In the rustling of leaves and the hush of the river, she thought she heard the whisper of voices that once filled her world: Ned's gentle counsel, Robb's laughter, Arya's bold declarations, Sansa's songs, Bran's wonder at climbing the walls, Rickon's childish giggles. Though ghosts now, they guided her onward. She breathed in the night air, tasting the salt of her tears and the metallic echo of old regrets. The wind caressed her battered throat, but she felt no fear in that moment. The fate that had once nearly claimed her had, for reasons she could not fathom, allowed her to remain. She was Catelyn Stark, born of House Tully wed to House Stark. She was a mother who had lost too much, but not everything. Not yet. And so she closed her eyes, vowing that the Red Wedding would not be the end of her story. Survival had been forced upon her, and if the gods thought she would do nothing with that gift, they were mistaken. Her destiny was wound now with a quest for her children, for vengeance, for justice, whatever she could wrest from this cruel world. In the soft crackle of the dying fire, she heard her own heartbeat, steady and sure. As dawn approached, she settled into a restless sleep, dreaming of a time when her family was whole, dreaming of the sound of wind in the godwood of Winterfell, the quiet hush of snow falling on the ancient walls. And in that dream she found a fragment of the strength she needed to continue her search, to keep hope alive where others would have let it die. She woke at the first hint of dawn, mouth dry and limbs stiff with the aches of relentless travel. For a moment Catelyn forgot where she was. Then she tasted ash on the air and recalled that their meager camp lay by the stream in the Riverlands, far from the relative safety of Greywater Watch. She felt the grit of dirt beneath her fingers and the tug of the bandage at her throat. The wound had healed enough that it no longer bled, but she knew it would scar her forever, inside and out. She stretched her arms and forced herself upright, stifling a groan at the pain that lanced through her back. Sleep had come fitfully, haunted by the image of Sandor Clegane's blood-stained face, the memory of his final rasping words about Arya. Derek knelt near the dying fire, stirring the embers with a charred branch. He was little more than a silhouette in the bluish-gray light, but he turned when he heard her shift and quietly offered a nod. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the shadowed hollows under his eyes. The search for Arya was wearing on him, too, though he kept his complaints to himself. If not for him, she might have perished on the floor of the twins. He carried on as her shield, guide, and though unspoken, friend. Two crannogmen dozed a short distance away, curled beneath rough blankets, their muted cloaks blending with the damp grass. They had told her their names once, but she knew them only as slender shapes in mottled green-brown, ghosts of the marshlands who glided along in silence. She rose slowly, pressing a hand to her throat as if to reassure herself she could still speak. Whispering so as not to wake the others, she joined Derek. His features were difficult to read in the dimness, but she caught a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "Morning, my lady," he said softly, setting aside the branch. His voice was gruffer than usual, drained by these hard roads. "Are you hungry? We've little left but salted rabbit." "I'll eat," she managed. "We need our strength." They shared a quiet meal, shreds of tough meat and a few hard lumps of bread they'd bought 2 days prior. Each swallow brought a dull ache to her throat, reminding her of the brutality that had almost claimed her life at the Red Wedding. She forced the food down regardless, refusing to let the memory of fry knives take everything from her. By the time the crannogmen roused themselves, the sky was stained with the promise of a cloudy sunrise. Birds called from a nearby thicket. The small group quickly kicked dirt over the fire and erased any sign of their passing. Under Howland Reed's guidance, they had learned caution was their surest ally. Fry outriders searched for deserters or fugitives, and roving outlaws preyed on the weak. The Riverlands were more dangerous than ever, infested with fear and desperation after years of relentless war. They set forth at once. The forest sprawled around them, the narrow footpath strewn with broken branches and old leaves. A thin fog lingered between the trunks, sliding across the ground. The chill that nipped at Catelyn's cheeks made her long for the thicker cloak she had left behind in Greywater Watch. But they traveled light. Too many bulky supplies would slow them, and speed mattered more than comfort. She trudged alongside Derek, each step accompanied by the soft rustle of leaves and the steady drip of condensation off the trees. The crannogmen took the lead, scanning for tracks or subtle clues. They never spoke unless necessary, preferring a series of gestures that Catelyn did not fully understand. Perhaps they saw footprints in the mud or the scuff of a horse's hoof, she could only guess. They led her onward, deeper into the shadowed wood. Time drifted. The path rose and fell in gentle slopes, revealing glimpses of farmland or meadows swallowed by brambles. Here and there, they encountered evidence of recent travelers, half-burned campfires, footprints pressed into the muddy ground, broken branches that suggested someone had passed by with a heavy load. Once, the crannogmen tensed beside an abandoned cart, hand-carved and splattered with old blood. Its wheels were wrenched free as if by great force. Corpses littered the ditch behind it, 2 men in ragged cloaks, 1 woman with a rope around her neck. The stench was overwhelming, and Catelyn covered her nose with a scrap of cloth, swallowing back the bile that rose in her throat. She felt no surprise that the bodies had been left to rot. This was lawless land now, and with winter on the horizon, mercy had become a rare commodity. Her boots squelched in the mud as she stared down at the pitiful scene, heartsick. She recalled simpler times when her father had ruled the Riverlands from Riverrun, ensuring farmers could till their land in peace. That era felt decades away, as though it had belonged to someone else. And in a sense it had. She was no longer the same woman. She pressed her lips together and turned away, refusing to allow tears. The dead here were beyond her help. Her hope lay in the living, in her daughter. They continued on, bypassing roads whenever possible. Eventually, the Crannogmen halted near a shallow stream. One of them pointed wordlessly to a cluster of footprints on the muddy bank. Catelyn tried to discern something in the faint impressions, a number of distinct boots, possibly children, among them. She glanced at Derek, who studied the prints with a frown. Without speaking, the Crannogman gestured upstream, as if to say that the trail led in that direction. Her heart fluttered. It was a lead, at least. She nodded, and they set off again. Hours later, they found the remains of a campsite nestled among willow trees. Smoke still lingered in the air, suggesting whoever had been here left recently. The Crannogmen crouched low, sifting through ashes in the fire pit and testing them with the back of a hand. One carefully lifted a piece of cloth from the undergrowth, a scrap of rough spun that might have been torn from a tunic. Catelyn's pulse raced, though she knew it might mean nothing. The realm was full of refugees, outlaws, and desper. 8 souls. Still, she felt a stirring of fragile hope. If Arya had traveled in a group, if she'd found companions, possibly the Brotherhood without banners, this might be their camp. Derek spoke up quietly. We'll need to keep watch for any sign of them on the move. If they're close, it might be best to proceed carefully. We don't want to spook them into running. She nodded. Her voice emerged as a rasp. We proceed on foot as quietly as we can. Let's hope they haven't gone far. They left the campsite in haste, forging through a belt of thick willows. The boggy ground sucked at their boots. Gradually, they angled northward. The terrain changed from damp forest to rocky hills, and beyond the crest, they glimpsed a winding river, one of the many tributaries of the Trident. By late afternoon, they paused at the top of a slope overlooking a narrow valley. Smoke rose from the valley's far side, though the source was hidden by tall pine trees. Derek and the Crannogmen exchanged cautious nods, deciding to circle around and approach from behind a ridge. Catelyn followed, a dull ache in her neck from the tension. As the sky deepened toward twilight, they inched toward the source of the smoke. At last, Catelyn caught sight of half a dozen horses tied near a small clearing. Figures milled about near a large campfire, though it was difficult to see how many. The Crannogmen dropped to their bellies, motioning for Catelyn and Derek to do the same. She complied, pressing herself to the cold ground, leaves clinging to her cloak. In the flickering orange glow, she glimpsed men in a variety of mismatched armor. One wore a rusty breastplate, another carried a spear. A tall figure in a hooded cloak passed by the fire, carrying a bucket of water. A smaller shape, perhaps a youth, sat on a log, shoulders slumped. Her heart beat hard enough to hurt her ribs. Could it be Arya? She edged closer, straining her eyes. The child near the fire was a boy, though slight in build. She swallowed her disappointment, forcing herself not to let it spill into despair. But as she kept watching, another figure emerged from the shadows, a woman with cropped hair, draped in a dingy cloak. She had a lean face and large eyes that caught the firelight. Something in her posture, the tilt of her head, struck Catelyn like a jolt of lightning. The figure had that same fierce wariness, that same tension she remembered in Arya when she was about to run or fight. Her breath hitched. She turned to Derek, her expression surely wild with hope, and mouthed, "Arya." He glanced down at the camp, then back at Catelyn, uncertain. But she could see his gaze sharpen. He gave a tiny nod as though acknowledging the resemblance. Her heart hammered. The Crannogmen were signaling caution. They indicated 7 or 8 armed men below, possibly more hidden among the trees. Storming in would be suicide. The group could simply kill them on sight, especially if they recognized Catelyn Stark. Or if, ironically, they served the phrase. But from their ragged appearances, these looked more like outlaws, the sort who might swear to the ideals of Beric Dondarrion's band. Catelyn had heard stories that the Brotherhood without banners once championed the common folk. But these days, desperation could turn any band into cutthroats. She could not just watch from afar and risk Arya vanishing again. Her hands trembled with the force of her longing. She whispered hoarsely to Derek, "I have to speak to her." He gripped her arm gently. "It's too dangerous. Let me approach quietly. Test their intentions." She shook her head, a swirl of dread and determination flooding her. "Arya won't trust you on sight. She won't believe it's me unless she sees and hears me. I won't let her vanish again, not after we've come so far." Derek stared at her, conflict etched into his features. He glanced at the Crannogmen, who exchanged silent gestures. Neither seemed inclined to let Catelyn charge into the clearing alone. Finally, one of them moved swiftly around the perimeter, presumably to scout for hidden sentries. "We can circle closer," Derek relented, voice low. "Wait for the right moment. But if they see more than one or two of us, they might think they're under attack." Catelyn nodded, swallowing her panic. Together, they inched along the ridge, stepping lightly to avoid snapping twigs. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. Every second felt like a hammer blow. She heard one of the men below call out to the woman with cropped hair. "Boy, fetch some more kindling." The figure rose, muttering under her breath. A boy, they called her. Arya had once cut her hair short and pretended to be a boy. It had been so long since Catelyn had last laid eyes on her that she barely recognized this hardened silhouette. But everything else, the voice's timbre, the quickness of her movements, felt painfully familiar. She crept around a thick pine trunk, Derek at her flank, until they were just behind the ring of firelight. The shapes of the outlaws were clearer now. A bearded man in a battered helm stacked stones into a makeshift oven near the flames. Another, with a scar down his nose, sharpened a long dagger. The tall, hooded figure brought over a knapsack. The woman who might be Arya fed a few sticks into the fire, her posture tense. She wore trousers patched many times over, her shoes caked in mud, a short blade at her hip. Though her face was partly hidden by shadow, Catelyn could see the angle of her jaw, the intensity in her eyes. Her heart clenched with such force she feared she might faint. Derek leaned in, whispering almost inaudibly, "If that's your girl, how do we make them hear us without being shot full of arrows?" Catelyn's mind spun. She considered calling Arya's name, but a shout might alarm the entire camp, leading them to respond with steel before they recognized her. She could step forward quietly, arms raised in peace. Yet it only took one arrow from a startled bowman to end her. And if these men were sworn to the Lannisters or the Freys, she would be handing herself over to new captors. But she could not let fear paralyze her now. Arya was only yards away. She had to act. She reached out and gently squeezed Derek's arm in thanks, then slipped away from him, her heart pounding so loudly she felt certain everyone in the clearing would hear. She moved with slow deliberation through the trees, lifting her hands to show they were empty. She forced her aching throat to form words, quiet at first. "Arya," she called, barely above a whisper. "Arya." The men around the fire stiffened. One leapt to his feet, hand on his weapon, scanning the darkness. The tall one jerked his hood back, revealing a boyish face marked by old burns. Another snatched up a short spear, eyes narrowed. But the figure by the fire, the one called Boy, spun around sharply at the sound of her name. Her eyes, fierce and bright, darted toward the shadows. Catelyn pushed a trembling breath from her lungs. "Arya," she said again, stepping just into the edge of the firelight, palms raised. She saw her daughter's face go taut, confusion warring with raw emotion. Arya's brows drew together, and in the flickering orange glow, her features seemed older than her years, sculpted by hardship. A heartbeat passed. Then Arya's mouth opened. "Who?" she began, voice cracking. Her gaze swept across Catelyn's hair, her cloak, her scarred throat. She looked ready to bolt or draw the blade at her hip. One of the outlaws barked, "Stay where you are. Show your face." Catelyn took another step forward, letting her hood fall from her head, ignoring how her hair tumbled in uneven waves around her gaunt cheeks. She could not tear her eyes from Arya, hardly daring to believe that her daughter was real. "Arya," she whispered, voice rasping with desperation. "It's me. It's your mother." Several things happened at once. The outlaws shouted, lurching to their feet. Arya staggered back, eyes wide, as if the world had just upended itself. Catelyn raised her hands higher, showing she held no weapon, though she braced for the possibility of an attack. A man with the scarred nose lunged toward her. His dagger flashed, but Arya shouted, "Stop!" Her voice rang with a commanding edge that belied her small stature. The man hesitated. The others glanced at one another uncertainly. Catelyn's heart was near to bursting from her chest. She forced her dry throat to speak again. "Arya, my girl," she faltered, tears burning her eyes. "I survived. I swear it. I survived the twins. I've come to find you." Arya took a shaky step forward. She still wore that guarded expression, as if she hardly dared to trust her own eyes. "My mother is dead," she said hollowly, though her voice quivered. "They killed her at the twins. She was with Robb. Everyone said so. You can't be her." Before Catelyn could answer, she felt the press of cold metal at her back. Another outlaw must have circled behind her. She stiffened, breath-catching, but she kept her hands raised in surrender. "It's true," she whispered, trying to keep her composure for Arya's sake. "I was cut, my throat, but it wasn't deep enough. I lived. I swear on the old gods and on your father's memory." Arya's eyes shone in the firelight. She looked from the ugly scar peeking above Catelyn's collar to her tear-streaked cheeks. Slowly, she reached for the blade at her side, not in aggression but in trembling uncertainty. For a moment, it seemed as though she might run. The tension was almost unbearable. Then the dagger behind Catelyn pressed harder, and the man holding it growled, "We should kill her or bind her. We can't trust a stranger to come sneaking about in the dark, spouting nonsense." Arya exploded into motion. "No," she snapped, spinning on the man. "Don't you dare hurt her." Her voice cracked, raw with conflicting emotions. "Put your steel away." The man stared at her with astonishment, but something about her fury or the glimmer in her eyes made him hesitate. Catelyn felt relief so intense it nearly made her knees give out. She turned slowly, careful not to provoke the man behind her. In the flicker of the fire, she glimpsed the confusion on his face. He looked at the others, uncertain whether to disregard Arya's command. A tall woman with a bow stepped closer, arrow half-notched. Everything hung on a knife's edge. Finally, the man at Catelyn's back lowered his dagger. The tall bowwoman did not relax her draw, but she did not fire. They all turned to Arya for some explanation, and Catelyn watched her daughter grapple with disbelief and a flicker of hope. The moment felt impossibly fragile. Then Arya sucked in a shuddering breath, tears welling in her eyes even as she tried to keep them from falling. She stepped closer and slowly, warily, lifted a trembling hand toward Catelyn's face as if to test if she were a phantom. Catelyn's heart clenched, and she stood absolutely still, letting Arya see and feel the truth for herself. When Arya's fingertips brushed her mother's cheek, she flinched at the contact but did not pull away. She stared into Catelyn's eyes, searching for something: familiarity, love, or the reassurance of a memory that could not lie. Then a sob broke from Arya's throat, and she stumbled forward, burying her face against Catelyn's chest. Catelyn's arms came around her daughter in an embrace made awkward by tension and heartbreak. Arya felt so small in her arms, so thin. She clung to Catelyn with both hands fisted in her cloak, her body shaking with silent tears. Catelyn's own tears fell freely, soaking into Arya's cropped hair. She stroked her child's back, whispering, "Hush, hush, my girl, I have you," though her voice was broken. She had dreamed of this moment but never allowed herself to believe it would truly happen. That she would hold Arya alive and breathing. Part of her wanted to break down entirely, to sink to her knees and let the grief of the last year spill out. But the danger of their surroundings pressed in, reminding her they were not safe. Slowly, Arya drew back, her face flushed with mingled sorrow and guarded relief. The outlaws watched them with a mixture of bafflement and suspicion. One man spat to the side, eyeing Catelyn's tear-streaked face. "If she's your mother, who are you? Some highborn lady we can ransom." Arya glared daggers at him. "She's Lady Catelyn Stark, you fool. You'd best not speak that way." A hush fell. Some looked uneasy. They must have heard the tales. The Red Wedding was infamous by now, and the rumor that all the Starks at the twins had perished was widely accepted. That Catelyn Stark might be alive defied logic and fueled superstition. Some might have heard more fearful legends about her reanimated corpse. Catelyn could sense their fear, the wariness in their faces. Another man, a broad-shouldered fellow with a battered breastplate, stepped forward. He cast a glance at the bowwoman, silently urging her to lower the arrow. After a tense moment, she did so. Then he gave Catelyn a curt bow, as though uncertain how to address her. "My lady, we meant no harm. We didn't know." The girl never spoke much of her family, just that she'd lost them. Catelyn looked to Arya for confirmation. Her daughter's cheeks grew red, and she wiped at her eyes angrily. "They always said there was no sense living in the past." just kept me alive by teaching me to fight, to fend for myself. Beric Dondarrion used to lead them. Thuras of Myr, too. But they're gone now. Scattered, some dead. We're what's left of the Brotherhood. Not that they deserve that name. They've turned into, well, we do what we can to survive. The broad-shouldered man didn't deny it. We've been forced to take coin when we can. The war left too many hungry, too many violent men prowling these lands. We aren't the Knights of the Seven anymore, more like a pack of dogs scrounging for scraps. Catelyn heard the bitterness in his tone and a hint of shame. She tried to speak gently, though her voice wobbled. You gave my daughter shelter. For that I thank you. Arya clenched her jaw. They took me in after I escaped Harrenhal, after I escaped the twins. After the Hound took me, I ran again and nearly starved. They found me. I didn't trust them at first, but I had nowhere else to go. Catelyn recalled what Sandor Clegane had told her about traveling with Arya, about how she left him to die. She could see the ghosts in Arya's eyes, remnants of terrors she might never speak of. It pained her that her daughter had endured such horrors alone, forced to harden herself. But she was alive, and that was a blessing Catelyn would not squander. She brushed a tear from Arya's cheek with her thumb, voice trembling. We can find safety together now. We can try to return to the north or find shelter somewhere, maybe with the Tully bannermen who remain loyal, or Arya snorted softly, though tears glistened in her lashes. The Freys are in charge, Mother. The Tullys can't protect us. Riverrun might be under siege if it isn't already fallen. You don't know how bad it's gotten. The war, everything is burned or sacked or sworn to the Lannisters and their dogs. I wanted to kill them all, but I'm just, her voice wavered as if loath to admit weakness. Catelyn's heart ached. She laid a hand on Arya's shoulder. We'll figure a way. We only need to keep faith. There are loyal friends left in the world. Arya regarded her mother's face, the half-healed scar at her throat and the sorrow in her eyes. Slowly she exhaled. Where have you been all this time? Catelyn began to answer but realized they were still standing in the circle of watchful outlaws, many of whom seemed tense as coiled snakes, uncertain what to do now that a highborn lady had appeared in their midst. The bowwoman behind them had set her arrow aside, but her posture remained wary. The man with the scar glared at Catelyn as though uncertain if she posed a threat or a prize. It was not a comfortable situation. Perhaps we should speak in private, Catelyn murmured. Arya nodded, turning to the others. I need to talk to her alone. The broad-shouldered man rubbed his jaw. We'll give you space. But no one wanders far. We've no idea who else might be out here, or if she brought more than just herself. Derek chose that moment to step into the clearing, keeping his hands visible. The outlaws tensed and a few weapons rose. He raised his voice calmly, I mean no harm. I'm her companion. We travel together. That's all. We have 2 Crannogmen not far off guides from the neck. We didn't come to fight. The outlaws eyed him suspiciously, but Arya waved them down. He's with my mother. She turned to Catelyn, expression caught between relief and frustration. Come on. We can talk by that oak tree over there. They moved a short distance away, beneath the crooked limbs of an ancient oak that creaked in the night breeze. The grass was damp underfoot, and the faint glow of the campfire licked across the side of Arya's face. Catelyn wished they had better lighting or the warmth of a safer haven, but she had no illusions they could conjure comfort easily. She faced her daughter with a shaky breath, wanting to pull her into another embrace, to hold her and promise everything would be all right. But Arya's guarded eyes told her it would take more than a mother's hug to erase what the girl had been through. Quietly, Catelyn told Arya of the Red Wedding's horrors, how she'd tried to ransom the Freys for Robb's life, how she'd felt the knife at her throat, the blood. She spoke haltingly of the days after, how she found herself abandoned in the fortress corridor, half dead, and how Derek saved her. She described the journey north to Greywater Watch, where Howland Reed sheltered her. She did not mask her grief at Robb's death, nor the fierce guilt that gnawed at her for failing to protect him. Every word tasted bitter, and she had to pause often to steady her trembling voice. Arya listened in silence, face pale and set, tears sliding down her cheeks unnoticed. When Catelyn finished, Arya stared at the ground, fists clenched at her sides. I saw them kill Robb, she whispered, voice hollow. Not from up close, but I was there, outside. The Hound tried to take me in, but there was chaos and fighting. People dying, and then they brought out Robb's body, and her throat closed around the horror. She shook her head, voice raw. I hate them. All of them. Freys, Lannisters, Boltons. I swear I'll. She stopped, choking on her fury. Catelyn reached out, placing a hand on her daughter's arm gently. We will have justice, she whispered, someday. But revenge alone won't keep us alive. We have to be cunning. The North bleeds under the Boltons and their bastard. The The phrase hold Riverrun. King's Landing is under the Iron Throne and Sansa is still their captive, or so I've heard. Arya flinched at the mention of Sansa. If she's alive, the Lannisters have her. I thought about going there once to break her free somehow, but it was madness. The Hound said I was a stupid girl to even try. Catelyn understood the pang. She thought of Sansa's sweet smile, her gentle heart. The notion of her daughter trapped in King's Landing, forced into marriage, forced to endure the Lannisters' cruelty, made Catelyn's anger flare anew. She swallowed thickly. We cannot rescue her alone. We have no armies, no gold, no real allies except House Reed's hidden domain. We must be careful. Arya's eyes flickered. Then what do we do? It was the question that had plagued Catelyn every step of her journey. She parted her lips, searching for an answer that would not sound hollow. We survive, she said at last. We find a place to wait, to gather our strength. Perhaps we can rally some of the small folk or contact the Manderleys in White Harbor or other houses that remain loyal. The Umbers, the Glovers, if they still resist the Boltons in secret. Above all, we keep ourselves alive. That is how we honor Robb and your father and everyone we've lost. Arya sucked in a shaky breath, tears shining. I don't want to hide anymore. Catelyn cupped her daughter's face, feeling the jut of cheekbones that had grown sharper from hunger and hardship. I know, she said softly. But if we rush into the wolf's jaws, we'll only give our enemies more reason to celebrate. And we will have no chance to save Sansa or to avenge Robb. She paused, voice quivering at the mention of her slain son. You are not alone anymore, Arya. I'm here. Something in Arya's eyes softened, though it bore the weight of too many losses. She gave a tiny nod and leaned her forehead against Catelyn's shoulder in a gesture of weary acceptance. For a moment, Catelyn cradled her daughter's head, trying not to cry again. She needed to be strong for Arya's sake, to give her some semblance of a future. A cautious shuffle sounded nearby. Derek stood a few steps away, close enough to intervene if the outlaws turned hostile, but far enough to give them privacy. Arya glanced at him, wiping her cheeks. He saved you from the phrase? Catelyn nodded. Yes. He's proved himself loyal. Arya let out a quiet breath. Loyalty is hard to find these days. She studied Derek's face, then turned her gaze to the ragged band around the fire. I owe them for giving me shelter, but I don't know if they'll let me go easily. They've lost so many of their own to the war. A few among them talk of ransoming me if they ever could. Not because they hate me, but because they think it's the only way to survive. Everything is broken now. Catelyn felt a surge of anger at the idea of Arya's so-called companions trying to ransom her. She looked back at the group with narrowed eyes. Most were still watching them warily. We'll see about that. Let's speak to their leader. Arya nodded reluctantly. Together, they returned to the campfire's glow. The tall woman with the bow leaned against a tree, arms crossed. The bearded man in the battered helm hovered behind her. The broad-shouldered one seemed to be the closest thing to a leader, though that might simply be because he was the loudest and largest among them. He cleared his throat as they approached. So, you truly are Lady Stark, he said, eyes darting between mother and daughter. I don't doubt it now. The girl looks near your image, though a bit scrawnier. Arya scowled, folding her arms, but Catelyn touched her shoulder to keep her from saying something regrettable. Catelyn addressed the man directly, trying to maintain a regal poise she had not used in months. Her voice came out rasping, yet firm. I am Catelyn Stark, Lady of Winterfell by marriage. My daughter is Arya, a true-born daughter of House Stark. We intend to leave this place. We have no quarrel with you, but we mean to go north. The man exhaled, flicking a glance at his comrades. Some averted their eyes, as if uncertain how to proceed. He turned back to Catelyn. We're no knights. We've not exactly followed the old codes. But we've done our best to protect the girl from worse fates. This was never meant to be a lifetime arrangement. Arya's gaze flicked to him. You said you were going to find Lord Beric again. A pause. The man's mouth tightened. Aye, but word is Beric was slain, truly slain this time, with no Thuras around to bring him back. The groups fractured. We heard rumors he was wandering the hills as a ghost, but that's likely campfire talk. So we've stuck together mostly from necessity, picking off Frey couriers or Lannister supply wagons when we can. We're outlaws, though, not an army. If you want to leave, we won't stop you. But I'd be lying if I said we won't miss your sword, little wolf. Arya bristled. I'm not that good with a sword. The man chuckled wryly. You're better than half the lads in these parts, mark my words. Catelyn felt a flicker of relief. It seemed they would not force Arya to remain. Still, she asked, is there a price you would demand for letting her go? A hush fell and tension flickered across a few faces. The tall bowwoman shifted on her feet but said nothing. At length, the man shook his head slowly. We're not so low as to keep a girl hostage for coin. Not anymore, at least. The times we spoke of ransoming her were half jest, half desperation. We want no trouble, my lady. If the old ways were still strong, a man might hope for a reward for returning a highborn child safely to her kin. But these are not the old days, and I don't fancy bringing the wrath of the Freys or Lannisters down upon us if word got out. Arya let out a breath she'd been holding. Catelyn inclined her head. You have my gratitude, then. If the day ever comes when House Stark rises once more, I will remember your mercy. A faint smirk crossed the man's face as if he found the thought naive. House Stark's as good as dead, with the Boltons scouring the north. But I'll wish you luck. The old wolf, Ned, was a decent man. Maybe you'll find some measure of justice yet. Catelyn swallowed, forcing calm. The man's cynicism was understandable. She did not argue with him. Instead, she offered a nod and turned away, leading Arya toward Derek, who stood by the tree line with watchful eyes. As they passed, Catelyn noticed that a few outlaws parted in grudging respect. Though unspoken, it seemed they recognized she had endured something beyond comprehension. Perhaps they had lost mothers or sisters to the endless war. Their stares were not cruel, only curious or pitying. When they reached Derek, he spoke in a low tone. We should leave before they change their minds, my lady. It's too dark to get far, but we can at least put some distance between us and them by dawn. Arya looked at the night sky, still an inky expanse. We could walk by moonlight, but it's risky. There are brigands, wolves, who knows what else. Catelyn thought of the crannogmen, one of whom had gone scouting the perimeter. We have some help. Let's meet our companions and move away. We'll find a safer spot to rest. They retraced their steps to the ridge where the crannogmen waited. One melted out of the darkness at their approach, bow in hand, eyes flicking warily to Arya. Catelyn quietly introduced her daughter, though the small man merely grunted in acknowledgement. The other crannogmen soon emerged as well, confirming there were no immediate threats in the vicinity. Under their guidance, the group slipped away from the outlaws' firelight. Catelyn could not help glancing over her shoulder, relieved that the band made no move to follow or hinder them. They walked until the faint moon broke through the clouds, offering scant illumination. Eventually, the crannogmen led them into a thick grove beside a rocky stream, judging it sufficiently hidden for the night. Arya helped gather kindling for a small, carefully shielded fire, her movements silent and efficient. It struck Catelyn how much she had grown, no longer a child who needed direction, but a young woman shaped by adversity. She burned with curiosity over Arya's experiences, wanting to know every detail of her survival. But exhaustion weighed on them all. Derek found a sheltered spot beneath the branches of an old willow where they could spread out their blankets. Arya eyed him warily, though her mother had vouched for him, so she made no protest. When at last they settled around the low fire, Catelyn watched her daughter in the flickering glow, heart aching with both love and sorrow. She wanted to pull Arya into her arms and never let go. But Arya seemed uneasy, as though uncertain how to reconcile the mother she had lost with the woman who now returned from the dead. Catelyn did not push. Some wounds would need time to mend. Eventually, Arya spoke quietly, directing her words to Derek. How did you save her? Her tone was neither accusing nor grateful, just curious. You were at the twins? Derek nodded. I was. I served under House Umber, or tried to. During the feast, when the slaughter began, everyone was running or dying. I found her, I found Lady Catelyn left for dead. I managed to pull her away before Fry men noticed. We took a boat, slipped into the night. The rest is a long story. Arya examined Derek's face as though searching for signs of duplicity. After a moment, she shrugged. Then, I owe you thanks. He waved it away. You owe me nothing. I did what was right. Silence enveloped them once again, broken only by the crackle of wetwood on the fire. The crannogmen took positions on opposite ends of the little clearing, scanning for danger. Their stoic presence was comforting. Catelyn began to feel the press of fatigue tugging her eyelids. She gestured for Arya to settle against her if she wished, but Arya remained a slight distance away, hugging her knees. Catelyn understood. Too much had changed since the last time they had shared a hearth. She would not force closeness on a child who had survived so much alone. Eventually, as the small flames died to embers, they drifted into a restless sleep. Catelyn dozed fitfully, nightmares tugging at her, visions of Fry men leering and bloody crossbow bolts streaking through torchlight. She awoke more than once, heart pounding. Each time, she half expected that Arya's presence was just another cruel dream. But each time, she glimpsed her daughter's small form curled under a thin blanket and exhaled relief, letting the knowledge that she was no longer alone wash over her. At dawn, they rose in somber silence. The sun glinted through the leaves, and a brisk breeze rattled the branches overhead. They shared a meager breakfast of dried fruit, stale bread, and water from the stream. Derek suggested they continue moving north, though how far they could get before encountering Fry patrols was anyone's guess. The Crannogmen reminded Catelyn of their familiarity with hidden paths through the neck, suggesting they could guide her and Arya back to Greywater Watch or at least to a safe location in the marshes. Arya, however, looked torn. She stood on the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, gazing southward as though she wrestled with some private conflict. At length, she turned to Catelyn with a steely glint in her eyes. I want to come with you. But there's something I need to do first. Catelyn felt a prickle of unease. Something you need to do? Arya, what do you mean? Arya's hands clenched into fists. She swallowed, anger flickering across her features. I still have a score to settle with a man named Polliver. He was at Harrenhal. He stole my sword, threatened my friend. I heard he's roaming the Riverlands with another group of raiders. If he's nearby, I want it back. I want to cross his name off my list. Catelyn's heart sank at the determination in Arya's tone, the mention of a list of people she wanted dead, no doubt. She recalled the rumors she had heard that Arya had become consumed by vengeance. But a small part of Catelyn couldn't deny the pang of fear. Her daughter was only a child. Children should not speak of murder. Yet in this war-torn realm, innocence had been stripped from them all. She approached Arya, placing a hand gently on her arm. I understand your anger, but is it worth risking your life again? We've only just found each other. Arya's gaze slid to the side as though she fought to control the swirl of emotion inside her. It's my sword, she muttered, her voice tight. It's Needle. Jon gave it to me before we left Winterfell. It's all I have left of him, of home. I need it back. Needle. The name tugged at Catelyn's heart. She remembered how Ned had once indulged Arya's fascination with swordplay, though Catelyn herself had not been so understanding. That blade was a symbol of Arya's bond with Jon, with Winterfell, with everything that had been stolen from them. I wish Jon were here, Catelyn said softly, thinking of the boy who had once been a source of so much conflicting feeling within her. He had gone to the Night's Watch, and she knew nothing of his fate now. But Arya, your life matters more than any sword, no matter its meaning. Arya's lips pressed together in a thin line. I won't go after him alone if it's too dangerous. But if we're near, if I hear word of him, I want you to let me try. Please. Catelyn's instincts screamed to keep Arya from further danger, to gather her child and flee far from these burnt-out lands. But she saw the agony in Arya's eyes, the sense of purpose that was all she had left. Arya had endured too much to be treated as a little girl who mustn't make her own choices. If Catelyn denied her this, would Arya slip away in the night, trying to retrieve Needle on her own? She brushed a lock of hair off Arya's brow, forced to accept a reality she could never have imagined when they lived in Winterfell's warm halls. We'll proceed north, she said carefully. But if we find any certain knowledge of this Polliver, we'll decide what to do then together. I won't let you chase him alone. Arya nodded, relief mingling with fierce resolution. It stung Catelyn to see such hardness in her child's face, but she reminded herself that they had all been forged by tragedy. She returned to the others, explaining quietly that they would continue traveling, with Arya accompanying them. The Crannogmen gave no sign of objection, and Derek expressed only concern for caution, which Catelyn shared. They set off again. The sky was clear that morning, the sun bright on dew-laden grass. In a gentler world, it would have been a beautiful day for a ride, but they had no horses, and so they trudged on foot. Arya, though smaller, kept pace, her steps brisk, head on a swivel as if scanning for threats. She asked few questions, but from time to time, she would glance at Catelyn, as if to reassure herself that her mother was truly there. The hours unspooled. They crossed rolling fields dotted with the blackened husks of farmhouses. Once, they skirted a deserted village, picking through the rubble in search of supplies. All they found were gnawed bones and tumbled walls, evidence of the war's passage. Arya shook her head in disgust, lips pressed tight. Later that day, they paused beneath an abandoned windmill to rest and share what little food they had left. Derek offered Arya half of his portion without a second thought, and she accepted with a murmured thanks. Catelyn sipped water, her throat burning. She tried to recall the last time she had eaten a proper meal. At Greywater Watch, perhaps. The reality of their new life was meager rations and constant anxiety, but at least they were free. In the afternoon, they continued northwest, heading toward a region where the hills gave way to wide, marshy lowlands. Though the Crannogmen had guided them out of the neck once, they knew enough hidden byways to circle back without attracting the notice of Fry outposts. Evening approached, the sky flushing gold and rose when they came upon a small orchard that had somehow escaped the worst of the war. The trees bore withered apples and pears. They scrounged what they could from the ground, tossing aside the rotten bits. Arya devoured hers hungrily, hardly minding the bruises. Derek climbed one of the sturdier trees, shaking down a few more half-edible fruits for the group. The Crannogmen scouted the perimeter, ensuring no highwaymen lurked. Catelyn lingered near Arya, who stood by a gnarled trunk, running her palm over the rough bark. For a moment, Catelyn could almost see the child Arya used to be, wild, curious, climbing everything in sight at Winterfell. It was like a distant dream. A faint movement on the road beyond the orchard caught Arya's eye. She jerked her head, signaling her mother to look. Several figures were approaching from the south, a ragged line of travelers, perhaps half a dozen, their cloaks tattered, leading a limping mule laden with bulging sacks. The orchard lay off the main track, hidden behind a low stone wall. Catelyn, Arya, and Derek dropped into a crouch behind some bushes. The Crannogmen materialized from the shadows, alerted by the sound of footsteps. They watched silently as the travelers drew nearer. Catelyn could make out faces hollow with hunger, arms bearing old scars. The group looked more like peasants or refugees than soldiers. She counted 2 older men, a middle-aged woman, and 3 younger folk. One might have been a teenage boy. They glanced warily around the orchard as they passed, but seemed too exhausted to linger. She wondered if they might also be searching for apples. In a different time, she might have revealed herself and offered comfort. But now caution was paramount. Any encounter could turn violent over a few pieces of fruit. The travelers paused near the orchard wall, muttering among themselves. One of the older men wiped sweat from his brow. Another rummaged through the mule's sacks, pulling out a battered wooden bowl and some stale bread. The teenage boy eyed the orchard with longing, but the older man shook his head as if to say they could not spare the time to forage. Catelyn found herself pitying them. The entire realm was caught in the teeth of hunger and fear. Families torn apart, small folk turned wanderers. She laid a hand on Arya's arm, silently pleading with her to stay hidden. Arya nodded, eyes scanning the strangers. Suddenly, the middle-aged woman stumbled, letting out a soft cry as her ankle turned on a loose stone. She toppled against the orchard wall, sending a shower of pebbles tumbling. The teenage boy dashed to her side, and the older men rushed forward, alarmed. They gathered around her, apparently trying to help her stand. For several moments, all attention was on her injured ankle. Then one of the men looked up and spotted the apple tree branches shifting where Derek clung. He froze, hand drifting to a short knife at his belt. A moment later, the rest followed his gaze, eyes going wide with apprehension. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Derek, perched in the tree, tried to remain still, but the tension was palpable. Then one of the older men called out hoarsely, "We've no quarrel with you. We're just passing through." Catelyn realized that any second, panic could flare. These people might flee or lash out. She rose slowly from behind the bushes, lifting her hands to show no weapon. "We aren't enemies," she said, her voice still carrying that strained rasp but laced with as much gentleness as she could muster. "We're travelers, same as you. We'll not rob you." She glanced at Derek, who also carefully shifted in the branches, a few apples tumbling free. The group stared, startled by her sudden appearance. The teenage boy put a hand on the woman's shoulder, helping her balance. One of the older men squinted at Catelyn's face, then at the Crannogmen who now stood behind her, bows in hand but lowered. Finally, seeing no immediate threat, he let out a shaky breath. "We've no coin or goods worth stealing. Just scraps. Please, let us be on our way." Catelyn nodded, heart hurting for these frightened folk. "You may go," she said softly. "But if you need apples, help yourselves. The orchard seems abandoned. We took some, but there are plenty left." They hesitated, disbelieving, then glanced at each other. The teenage boy opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Carefully, the older man dipped his head in thanks, and the group shuffled deeper into the orchard, near the farthest rows of trees, to gather what they could. They moved with caution, watching to see if the invitation was some trick. But when no violence came, they began picking up fallen fruit with trembling hands. Arya watched silently, eyes dark. She had seen too many illusions of kindness twist into betrayal. But as the minutes passed and they saw the travelers simply collecting apples, both groups relaxed slightly. Derek slid down from his branch, landing softly beside Catelyn. The Crannogmen melted back, uninterested in these ragged refugees. When the travelers had gathered enough fruit to fill a sack, they nodded a final, wary thanks. Then they limped back to the road, helping the injured woman along, and continued northward. Catelyn thought of offering to travel together, strength in numbers, but the idea was folly. They had no reason to trust each other. Besides, the presence of Crannogmen might alarm them. And Catelyn did not want to risk word spreading too widely that she and Arya Stark walked the roads. 1,000 gold coins might tempt the most wretched to betray them. The orchard felt oddly quiet after the travelers left. Arya slung her small pack over her shoulder, glancing at the remainder of the fruit. "We should take more for ourselves." Derek nodded. "Good thinking." He climbed another branch, gathering what few decent apples remained. Arya scooped them into the cloth bag they used for supplies. The Crannogmen kept watch. Catelyn watched her daughter work, and an ache rose in her chest. Arya was so self-reliant now, so different from the lively girl who used to quarrel with Sansa over embroidery lessons. War had forced her to become tough and lean, ready to fight for every scrap of survival. After they had collected enough provisions for a few days, they headed back onto the winding track, moving carefully. The air smelled of fallen leaves and distant smoke. In the afternoon light, Catelyn could almost imagine they were on a journey she used to make in simpler times, a visit to some far-flung village under Tully protection, bringing bread and salt as a gesture of goodwill. But that world was gone. For a time, they walked without speaking. Catelyn glimpsed the tension in Arya's shoulders as though she wrestled with a question she could not yet voice. At last, Arya slowed her pace until she walked beside her mother. "When we reach Greywater Watch," she asked hesitantly, "what then?" "We hide, like you did? While the Freys and Boltons keep strangling the North?" The question stung. Catelyn looked at her daughter's pinched expression, aware that Arya wanted action, not hiding. But the truth remained that they had nowhere else to go. "Lord Howland Reed may have information we need," she said gently. "He has loyal scouts. He knows the terrain of the Neck and beyond. If there's any chance to free Sansa or rally the North, he'll know. I promise we won't simply cower. But we must be patient." Arya stared down at her muddy boots. "I'm tired of being patient." Catelyn touched her shoulder. "I know. We lost so much, your father, Robb, your home. We need a plan, allies, resources. We can't do it alone." Arya's jaw worked. Maybe we can find Jon, too, somehow. He's at the wall, right? Or at least he was. He might still be there. If we could reach him." Catelyn's chest constricted. She had rarely thought of Jon with warmth. He had been Ned's bastard, and a part of her that she was ashamed of had resented his presence in Winterfell. But the years and the tragedies that followed had reshaped her perspective. Jon had loved Arya, and she him. He was of Stark blood. Perhaps he was the only true male Stark left. If he still lived at the Wall, maybe he could help, though the Night's Watch was sworn to neutrality. Still, it was a thought. "It's a possibility," she said softly, acknowledging her daughter's hope. "The path to the Wall would be perilous, but we'll keep it in mind. For now, let's see what Lord Reed advises." Arya gave a reluctant nod and said no more. The travel continued in companionable, weary silence until dusk. They made camp in a shallow dell beside a small spring, collecting dead wood for fuel. This time, Arya settled closer to Catelyn by the fire, though she still seemed restless. Derek recounted glimpses of their escape from the twins to the Crannogmen, and Arya listened intently, occasionally asking questions in a low voice. Catelyn answered as best she could. She revealed that, while at Greywater Watch, she had learned the scale of the North's dire predicament. Winterfell was in Bolton hands, White Harbor might still resist, but fear reigned. The Iron Throne had declared Roose Bolton Warden of the North. It was a betrayal that cut deeply, reminiscent of the darkest days of the war, when Ned had been executed, and all had seemed lost. Arya's eyes shone with anger at mention of the Boltons. "I've heard stories of that bastard, Ramsay. He's crueler than you can imagine. If he sits in Winterfell, that's not right." Catelyn closed her eyes, recalling rumors of flayed men and unspeakable atrocities. The thought that the place where her children had once laughed and played was now defiled by such evil made her blood run cold. "No," she managed. "It's not right, and it cannot last forever. The North remembers, or so they say." "The North remembers," Arya echoed, expression pensive. Under the darkening sky, they huddled around the flames, drawing what little warmth they could. The Crannogmen quietly discussed the safest route back to their watery homeland. gesturing at a crude map drawn in the dirt. Catelyn and Arya spoke no more that night. They had shared what words they could. When Arya dozed off on her blanket, Catelyn brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face, heart heavy with both gratitude and dread. This child had grown up in a crucible of death and betrayal. Perhaps that fierce spirit would help her endure the trials yet to come. Still, Catelyn prayed to the old gods, and even the new, that she might shield Arya from further horrors. She was not sure if any gods listened anymore, but she prayed nonetheless. They rose before first light, continuing their trek. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of hunger, fatigue, and vigilance. Each time they encountered signs of humanity, they kept their distance. They spotted fry banners once, borne by a mounted patrol of a dozen men crossing a ridge. Instantly, they ducked into a thicket, hearts pounding as the horsemen passed not 50 yards away. Catelyn's hand clenched around Arya's, and she felt her daughter's heart thudding in her slender wrist. That close call served as a reminder of their peril. Walder Frey's men would be well rewarded if they captured the last living Stark women. Eventually, after nearly a fortnight of careful travel, the land grew wetter, the ground yielding underfoot. Mist curled in the hollows of the morning. The air took on a swampy tang. Catelyn recognized the approach to the neck, its boggy expanses and stunted trees. The Crannogmen guided them onto hidden causeways that wove through the marsh. Arya eyed the landscape warily, more reminiscent of Harrenhal's moats than the rolling hills of the Riverlands. Water lapped at the edges of the narrow paths, dotted with patches of reeds that swayed in the wind. Despite the gloom, Catelyn felt a cautious relief. Here, the Freys dared not send large forces. The land belonged to House Reed, and outsiders found themselves lost or sucked into quicksand. She recalled her first journey through the neck many years past, traveling with Ned. Then it had felt like a quiet curiosity. Now it was an anxious refuge, a place to hide from a world gone mad. The Crannogmen used their knowledge to guide them deeper. For hours, they trudged along spongy ground, sometimes ankle-deep in water, sometimes balancing on logs that served as makeshift bridges. Arya, though sure-footed, slipped once and nearly toppled headlong into the swamp. Derek caught her arm, steadied her. A faint, embarrassed flush touched Arya's cheeks, and she muttered thanks under her breath. Neither mention of her near mishap nor teasing followed. This was too dangerous a land for jests. By late afternoon, they reached a cluster of twisted cypress trees amid deeper water. A small boat waited there, tied off to a gnarled root, just large enough for 4 or 5 people. One Crannogman, the taller of the pair, motioned them aboard. The waterway ahead was too deep for walking, but this vessel would bring them closer to Greywater Watch. Catelyn was surprised at how quickly the Crannogmen arranged for their transport. It confirmed that Howland Reed's watchers guarded these swamps diligently. If a boat was here waiting, it meant the Crannogmen had signaled their approach somehow, perhaps with calls of marsh birds or other subtle signs. Catelyn, Derek, and Arya settled in the center of the craft while the Crannogmen pulled them forward, navigating the reeds and submerged logs. The mist thickened, turning the world into a ghostly haze of green and gray. The water sloshed against the hull in a steady rhythm. Arya peered at the swirling fog, eyebrows drawn. The hush of the swamp was broken only by croaking frogs and the occasional splash of unseen creatures. It felt dreamlike, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying plants. They made slow progress, gliding through narrow channels that twisted unpredictably. More than once, a half-sunken tree forced them to backtrack. But the Crannogmen never lost their bearings. They moved with calm purpose, as though they could sense where the water was deepest, where the land rose enough to step out. Eventually, just as the sun began its descent, they emerged into a broader waterway that led to a low island bristling with reeds. Catelyn recognized the telltale signs that Greywater Watch was near, wooden ramparts barely visible through the haze, and the faint glow of lanterns. A sense of relief swept over her. She felt safer here than anywhere else in the realm, though she knew safety was relative. The swamps guarded them from armies, but not from the heartbreaks that followed them like shadows. When they disembarked at a small jetty, several Crannogmen waited, armed with spears and short bows. Their cautious expressions eased as they recognized the returning guides and saw Catelyn among them. They parted to allow passage onto the island's main walkway, which snaked between tall reeds into the fortress. Arya stared at the unusual architecture, huts and halls woven with living reeds, wooden watchtowers that seemed to merge with the bent trees. A labyrinth of walkways and platforms made up the heart of Greywater Watch, hidden behind a screen of greenery. The entire place felt alive, shifting with the wet earth. Arya gave a low exhale of surprise. She had never seen such a construction. A lean Cranagman woman in a cloak of green-brown materialized from behind a half-woven wall. She bowed to Catelyn. "My lady, Lord Reed awaits you in the main hall. He has been preparing for your return." Arya stared, and Catelyn realized her daughter had never met Howland Reed. Ned had spoken fondly of him, but the man had always been elusive, rarely leaving his marshy domain. Feeling a twist of anticipation, Catelyn inclined her head. "Thank you. We'll go now." She turned to Arya and Derek. "Come with me." They followed the Cranagman woman along a raised walkway toward the broad circular hall that served as the seat of House Reed. Torchlight glowed behind reed-woven walls, illuminating faint designs depicting scenes of heroic battles, a man dueling a giant, a woman crowned with leaves. A carved roof overhead dripped with condensation. Within, the hall was warm, lit by torches mounted on wooden pillars. The sweet, pungent smell of burning peat filled the air. Mats of woven rushes covered the floor. A handful of Cranagmen stood guard, but the central figure who drew Catelyn's gaze was Howland Reed himself. He rose from a curved wooden seat, slender and slight of stature, with sharp features and thoughtful gray eyes. His brown hair, streaked with threads of silver, was tied back from a lined brow. He wore simple leathers dyed green. When he saw Catelyn, he offered a small bow of greeting, then his gaze swept to Arya. Surprise and a flicker of joy sparked in his eyes. "Lady Stark," he said in a measured voice, "you have returned sooner than I expected, with new company." His attention remained on Arya, who hovered by Catelyn's side, uncertain. "Is that who I think it is?" Catelyn stepped forward, exhaustion warring with gratitude. "This is Arya, my daughter. She survived the war's cruelties and has found her way back to me." Howland Reed bowed his head respectfully to Arya. "Welcome, child of House Stark. You bear your father's spirit, I see." Arya glanced around, taking in the strange hall with guarded curiosity. "Thank you," she muttered, fidgeting with the hem of her cloak. "I've never been here before. I didn't realize we had such allies." A faint smile touched Howland's lips. "Your father was my friend. I do not forget old debts, and I do not forsake old bonds. You are both welcome here, for as long as you wish to stay." Relief mingled with a surge of emotion in Catelyn's chest. She dipped her head in thanks. "You have my gratitude, Lord Reed." He gestured to one of his attendants, who brought a carved wooden cup brimming with a steaming broth. He offered it to Catelyn, then to Arya, then to Derek. The taste was earthy and rich, a combination of mushrooms and swamp herbs. Arya's eyes widened slightly at the flavor, but she drank, clearly hungry. Howland's attendants laid out a modest meal of fish and dried berries, supplemented by bread that had a chewy, mossy taste. It was more nourishing than anything they had eaten on the road. Arya devoured her share, glancing at Catelyn as if to confirm it was all right to take more. Catelyn nodded, feeling a maternal pang at how starved her daughter must have been. When they finished, Howland settled himself cross-legged on a raised platform strewn with rushes, motioning for them to do likewise. Arya followed suit, her expression wary but curious. Derek lingered behind Catelyn, half guarding her, but at her gentle insistence, he joined them, showing respect to their host. The Cranagman guards remained near the walls, watchful and silent. Howland's voice was quiet yet carried a calm authority. "You are in the only place I can call truly safe, my friends. Still, the rest of the realm royals. News arrives daily, though not all of it can be believed. I trust you have heard little good on your journey." Catelyn let out a small sigh. "We avoided most roads, but we encountered enough to confirm that the Freys and Boltons hold the North and the Riverlands in a stranglehold. We also heard rumors that Joffrey Baratheon was poisoned at his wedding, that Tywin Lannister is dead, slain by his dwarf son. The throne rests with King Tommen under the regency of his mother. The war might be winding down in the south, but that means they can tighten their grip elsewhere." Howland nodded gravely. And from what our scouts say, the Boltons consolidate their rule over Winterfell. They parade the name Stark around, claiming legitimacy for that vile bastard, Ramsay. Most houses bend the knee out of fear. The Dreadfort men roam the land, stamping out any resistance. Arya gritted her teeth, knuckles whitening in her lap. "So the North is lost?" Howland studied her with sympathy. "Lost? Perhaps for now. But the north is vast and the hearts of its people are slow to change. While it's true that some houses will side with the Boltons out of self-preservation, I know of many who still hold loyalty to House Stark. They remain silent now, waiting for a sign or a surviving Stark to rally behind. Arya's eyes flicked to her mother. Catelyn pressed her lips together. They must think the line extinguished. But Arya, she's here. And if Bran or Rickon still live, or if Sansa can be rescued from King's Landing. Arya's voice was grim. Bran and Rickon are dead, they say. The Ironborn took Winterfell and burned it. That's what I heard, anyway. She paused, pain flickering in her eyes. But I suppose all I have are rumors. Catelyn swallowed the sting of that possibility. She had clung to faint hope that her younger sons had escaped the ruin of Winterfell somehow, but no proof had ever materialized. Each rumor contradicted the last. In the swirl of war, truth was elusive. The gods alone know, she said softly, wishing she could hold her youngest boys in her arms again. Howland Reed's gaze flicked from Catelyn to Arya. Some of my people believe that your brothers may yet live. Our scouts have found no evidence of their deaths and some whisper of 2 boys who fled Winterfell. But we cannot say for certain. The land is riddled with chaos and the Boltons spread false tales to secure their hold. Arya's shoulders tensed. So maybe they're alive, but we don't know where. Yes, Howland said simply. We do not know. We can only watch, listen, and wait. Catelyn wondered if that was all they could ever do, watch, listen, and wait. She felt Arya's frustration keenly. But her voice remained calm. In that case, we must be patient. If we can gather knowledge, find out who is truly loyal, perhaps we can plan something. A rescue for Sansa. A chance to confirm whether Bran and Rickon live. Even if we can't openly challenge the Boltons yet, we could sow disquiet among those forced to kneel. Howland's expression brightened slightly. I see a resolve in you, my lady, that was tempered by grief, but not broken. This is well. We stand a better chance if we have leadership from the true line of House Stark. Arya's cheeks reddened, uncertain if the compliment included her. She eyed Howland. So, we hide in Greywater Watch for now? He inclined his head. For a time. Lord Bolton sends men south occasionally, searching for traitors. We must let them wear themselves out. Meanwhile, my watchers glean intelligence. We have ways of traveling unseen through the swamps and beyond. If you wish it, I can send discreet messages to certain northern houses, House Mormont, House Glover, House Serwyn, reminding them that you survive. Your presence alone might rekindle hope. Catelyn's heart thudded. The notion of quietly resurrecting the Stark cause brought a stirring of purpose she had thought long lost. But she knew the risk. If the Boltons discovered she and Arya were alive, if word spread too far, they would clamp down with savage force, killing every last ally in their path. Still, she could not remain idle forever. Send the messages, then, she said, voice trembling with cautious resolve. But do it carefully. We cannot risk open confrontation yet. Let them know that House Stark endures. We will not kneel to betrayers. A glimmer of approval shone in Howland's eyes. It shall be done. In the meantime, rest. You have traveled far. We have huts prepared for you. My healers can tend any wounds or illnesses you suffer. I only ask that you remain within the boundary of Greywater Watch for the time being, so as not to draw the wrong sort of attention. Catelyn nodded gratefully. She sensed Arya's reluctance at the prospect of staying put, but her daughter did not voice an objection. They were too weary to do much else. With a slight bow, Catelyn thanked Howland again, and he summoned an attendant to lead them to 2 small huts built on a wooden platform over the water. She saw Derek stifle a yawn, exhausted from days of ceaseless vigilance. The Crannogmen also provided fresh water for bathing, though in wooden tubs that let the warm water seep out if one tarried too long. It was a luxury compared to the road. As dusk fell, Catelyn and Arya settled in one of the huts while Derek took the other. The interior was simple, woven mats on the floor, a pile of furs for bedding, and a little window that looked onto the marsh. A reed curtain offered a semblance of privacy. Arya set her pack down, rummaging through it for the few possessions she owned, a small comb, a waterskin, and some spare cloth. She glanced at Catelyn, then away. Catelyn tried to smile. I know this is strange. We've been on the run for so long. But we're safe now, Arya. Are we? Arya asked softly, her eyes darting to the window and the drifting fog. Safe for how long? The twins weren't safe. Harrenhal wasn't safe. We've lost so much. Catelyn closed the distance between them, placing her hands on Arya's shoulders gently. I can't promise we won't face more danger. But for now we can breathe. We have each other. And that is more than we had before. Arya's expression flickered with emotion. After a moment, she gave a short nod and let Catelyn pull her into a brief embrace. It still felt tentative, as if Arya feared being hurt again. Catelyn understood, trust was fragile and the world had done its best to shatter it. Yet she held her daughter close, inhaling the faint smell of swamp water and sweat, a smell that reminded her of the living child in her arms, not of ghosts. She murmured, "We'll find a way." That night, sleep came more peacefully. Catelyn dreamed of Winterfell's courtyard filled with laughter and sunshine. She saw Ned, Robb, Bran, Rickon, Sansa, and Arya all safe. She dreamed of a future where they all broke bread at the long tables. Even Jon, looking on from the side with a hesitant smile. When she woke in the dim hut, tears wet her cheeks, but her heart felt less heavy, for she heard Arya's soft breathing nearby. For once, the day's reality was kinder than the nightmares that had plagued her for so long. Morning arrived with a thick fog drifting over Greywater Watch. The sounds of water lapping against the wooden supports and the creak of the woven huts greeted them. Catelyn found fresh clothes laid outside the hut, simple garments of marshweave that the Crannog men used. They were light and somewhat coarse, but far cleaner than the tattered cloak she had worn. Arya wrinkled her nose at the color, a mottled green-brown, but she changed into it after rinsing her arms and face in the basin. She looked younger somehow, her short hair falling around her face, yet the hardness in her eyes remained. They broke their fast on small fish roasted over a peat fire with some kind of mash made from swamp tubers. Arya ate with her usual appetite, exchanging few words but glancing at Catelyn from time to time. Derek joined them, grateful for the meal, though he quietly noted that the boat ride had him feeling a bit off balance. Once fed, they were summoned to the main hall again to meet with Howland Reed. He wished to share the intelligence his scouts had gathered overnight. They found him studying a hand-drawn map of the northern territories, which shifted as the marshes themselves shifted. Wooden markers indicated possible Bolton garrisons or Frey outposts, while smaller tokens represented rumored loyalist pockets. He gave them a grim nod. My men confirmed that Lord Bolton is fortifying Moat Cailin to secure the approach to the north. His bastard roams the countryside, capturing or killing anyone suspected of harboring Stark loyalties. White Harbor remains quiet, though the Manderleys might be forced to capitulate for the sake of their city's survival. Word is they bend the knee outwardly but chafe in private. Catelyn frowned at the map. If Moat Cailin is fortified, no army from the south can pass. Then the people of the north are effectively at the Boltons' mercy. Howland tapped the marker for Moat Cailin with a knuckle. It said the fortress is half in ruins, but still formidable enough to block the causeway. The Boltons hold the keys now. Arya spoke up, voice trembling with anger. So they can do whatever they want in the north and no one can stop them. Not openly, Howland agreed. But there are still ways. The mountain clans have never bowed easily to any southern overlord, and the forests and hills can harbor resistance. If Lady Catelyn and you, Arya, were to reveal yourselves to certain loyal houses, it might spark an uprising. But that's a grand risk. The Boltons and Freys would retaliate brutally if they catch wind of it before we're ready. Catelyn felt torn. Part of her yearned to stride forth under the direwolf banner, proclaiming the survival of House Stark, rallying the north to throw off the usurpers. Yet she knew the cost if they failed. She saw the doubt in Derek's gaze. He had witnessed the worst of betrayals. She felt the tension emanating from Arya too, but also the fierce determination that burned in her daughter's heart. Catelyn exhaled, looking at Howland. We must proceed carefully. Perhaps we can make contact with one or two houses, those we trust beyond doubt. The Mormonts, for instance, have always been loyal. If the Manderleys are playing a double game, they might respond well to a secret emissary. We should gather their dispositions, see if they have men left to fight. Howland nodded, tapping another part of the map. We can dispatch my best scouts to Bear Island, to White Harbor, and beyond. If they can confirm sympathy for House Stark, we'll know who might stand with you. But it will take time. Arya spoke in a clipped tone. And in the meantime, the Boltons torture and kill. Are we meant to hide here for moons on end while they do as they please? Catelyn turned to her. We're meant to prepare. If we rush out, we risk dying for nothing. I won't lose you again, Arya. Not after all this. Arya opened her mouth to argue, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. She turned away, jaw clenched. Howland studied her sympathetically. I know the desire for justice, for action. We share it. In time, we will act. But the neck is the sword in the scabbard, it must remain hidden until the right moment to strike. Catelyn recognized that all of them were simply repeating the same caution. She placed a hand on Arya's shoulder. "We'll do something," she promised, voice trembling with sincerity. "But we need a foundation first." Arya pressed her lips together and nodded jerkily, though her eyes remained stormy. "Fine," she muttered. Howland regarded them both, then folded the map. "Rest for now. Learn our ways. My people can teach you how to move silently through marsh and bog, how to hunt or fish here. If trouble comes, you'll be better prepared. When we have word from the north, we will plan our next steps together." They dispersed from the hall, stepping out onto the walkway. The morning mist had lifted a bit, allowing beams of sunlight to flicker across the water. Derek excused himself to speak with a few crannogmen, hoping to learn more about their defensive strategies. Arya loitered by the walkway's edge, gazing out at the shifting scenery, a blend of water, reeds, and mossy hummocks. Catelyn joined her, leaning on the wooden railing. "You hate waiting," she said quietly, remembering how Arya used to pace restlessly whenever she was forced to be still. Arya shot her mother a sideways glance. I feel like we're letting them get away with it. They killed Robb and all our men. They butchered them at a wedding. It's not fair. And that's not even counting everyone they've hurt since. Now they sit in Winterfell." Catelyn's throat tightened. "I know. Believe me, I know. Every day I feel that anger burning inside me. But I also feel this need to keep you safe, to find a chance to save Sansa, to discover if Bran and Rickon are alive. If we strike too soon, we risk losing everything." Arya absently twisted a loose thread in her sleeve. "I used to dream about stabbing Walder Frey in the heart or crossing the Twins with an army at my back. Now I don't even know if that army exists. We're just so few." Catelyn placed a gentle hand on Arya's. "We'll find a way," she said again, though she understood the hollowness of such words. "The North remembers, Arya. That's more than a saying. It's in our blood. We only need a spark and the North will rise. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in a moon's turn. But someday." Arya drew a shaky breath. "And if we never get that spark? If the North is too frightened or broken? We still try." Catelyn squeezed her hand. "Because that's who we are. Starks don't bend. And we certainly don't break for the likes of the Freys or Boltons." Arya closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the smooth wood of the railing, as if trying to quell the roiling storm within her. Catelyn rubbed her daughter's back gently, recalling the nights in Winterfell when Arya was little, how she used to soothe her after nightmares. That felt like a different lifetime. But some things never changed. She would do whatever it took to protect Arya, to shelter her from the worst. And perhaps, together, they could find a path forward. The days passed, turning into weeks. Catelyn and Arya settled into life at Greywater Watch in a strange sort of routine. They rose at dawn, breakfasting on swamp fish, mushrooms, and reed bread. Derek trained with the crannogmen, learning to move through the bog without making a sound, how to set snares for frogs or eels. Arya, always quick to learn, picked up these skills with greater ease, her small frame an advantage in stealth. She even joined a few scouts on short trips through the deeper marshes, returning with mud-streaked clothes and a proud glimmer in her eyes. Catelyn, still nursing the scar at her throat, spent much of her time consulting with Howland Reed. She read his maps, studied reports from returning scouts, and quietly tried to puzzle out which northern houses might respond to the re-emergence of a Stark matriarch. She penned cautious letters, hidden in Reed's code, addressed to possible allies, the Mormonts of Bear Island, the Glovers of Deepwood Motte, the Serwins near Winterfell, the Tallhearts, even the Manderleys of White Harbor. Howland Reed's watchers would deliver them through a network of secret couriers. It was perilous, but if they succeeded, it might stir the embers of rebellion. At night, Catelyn sometimes dreamed of the Red Wedding, jolting awake with her hand clutched to her scarred throat. Other nights, she dreamed of Ned, remembering his warm brown eyes and the steady strength of his presence. She wondered if he would approve of what she did now, hiding in the swamps, sending coded messages. Ned had always preferred open, honorable dealings. Yet the world had grown more vicious since his death. Catelyn had no choice but to adapt. For Arya's sake, and for Sansa's, Bran's, Rickon's memory, or possible survival, she would do whatever was necessary. Arya grew increasingly restless, however. She practiced stealth and archery with the crannogmen, fletching her own arrows from reeds and scavenged feathers. She scrapped with Derek in sparring sessions, surprising him with her speed. But in quieter moments, she would corner Catelyn or Howland, asking about any new tidings from the north. Most reports spoke of the Boltons tightening their hold, forging alliances by fear or greed. The Karstarks, still reeling from Rickard Karstark's execution, had sworn fealty to Bolton. The Umbers were rumored to be in disarray, with part of the family forced to comply. No outright resistance was reported, only simmering discontent. One rainy afternoon, as the rush huts dripped with water and the sky was a dull gray, Arya burst into the main hall while Catelyn and Howland pored over a newly arrived scout's report. Arya stomped across the woven floor, ignoring the damp footprints she left behind, and planted herself in front of the low table. Catelyn looked up, alarmed by her daughter's expression, mulish, furious. "We can't just sit here," Arya blurted, voice trembling. "There's a man named Polliver who's been seen near the salt pans, and I have to." Catelyn exchanged a quick glance with Howland, who wore a puzzled frown. "The salt pans are far from here," Catelyn said, forcing calm. "What do you mean, you have to?" Arya bit her lip as though she'd said too much. But then she squared her shoulders. "He has Needle. My sword. He took it from me at Harrenhal," threatened my friend. You said if we learned where he was, you'd let me decide." "I heard the scouts talking. They said some outlaws attacked travelers near the salt pans, a man with a notched sword that might be Needle. I want it back." Catelyn sighed, setting aside the report. She reached for Arya's hand, but Arya snatched it away. "Arya, the salt pans are not close. It would be a dangerous journey, and we're waiting on crucial letters. We can't simply march out for vengeance on one man." Arya's cheeks flamed. "It's not just vengeance. I need Needle. It's part of who I am, part of Winterfell. Jon gave it to me." Her voice caught. "Don't you see? Without it, I feel like I have nothing." Pain flared in Catelyn's chest. She understood that for Arya, the sword symbolized more than steel. Still, she could not allow her daughter to risk her life on a reckless quest. "Child, we can't risk losing you when there's so much at stake. How can you ask me to just forget it?" Arya demanded, eyes glimmering. "Everything else was taken from me. My father, my brothers, my home. Robb was murdered. Sansa's a prisoner. Needle's all I have left." Her voice broke. "Please, mother." Catelyn closed her eyes. She had promised Arya that if they heard of Polliver, they would decide together. She felt the weight of her vow and the heartbreak in Arya's plea. But the idea of traveling to the salt pans near the Trident's mouth and hunting for an outlaw in that lawless region was madness. They had only just found refuge. Howland gently interjected, voice calm. "If the scouts heard rumors, that does not mean it's truly your Needle or the same man. Rumors can be misleading." Arya's face twisted in frustration. "I know that. But I won't rest if there's a chance it's him." Catelyn rose from her seat, crossing to Arya. She placed her hands on the girl's shoulders, noting how Arya trembled with contained anger. "I don't want you to give up hope, but we need to think carefully. If we go to the salt pans, we risk crossing Frey territory again or running into Lannister patrols. We risk everything. For what might be a rumor." Arya blinked hard, tears threatening. "But you said you'd help me if we had a lead." Catelyn felt a surge of guilt. "I did. Let me speak with Howland, see if he can spare scouts to confirm the rumor. If they find he's truly there, if Needle truly is in his possession, we'll find a way. But we can't rush off blindly." Arya looked ready to argue, but then her shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine," she mumbled. "Send your scouts." But if it's true, her gaze sharpened with a hint of the wolfish determination that lurked behind her eyes. "I'm going." Catelyn nodded slowly. "We'll see. For now, trust me." Arya jerked her head in stiff agreement, then whirled and strode out of the hall, leaving a tense silence behind. Howland exhaled, expression thoughtful. "She has the wolf's blood," he murmured, referencing the trait said to run strong in some Starks, impulsive, fierce. "This place tames few hearts." Catelyn rubbed her brow. "She's been through too much. If retrieving that sword helps her heal, I want it for her. But if it's a fool's errand..." Howland finished the thought. "We risk both your lives." He nodded, stroking his chin. "Very well. I'll dispatch watchers to the salt pans. They can be swift and subtle. If there is truth to these rumors, we'll have better knowledge before deciding a course." "Thank you," Catelyn murmured, grateful for his measured approach. She did not want to stifle Arya's desire to regain a piece of her old self, but she refused to let her daughter run headlong into a trap. Perhaps the rumor would prove false, or Polliver would vanish before they arrived. Or perhaps, if the rumor was true, they could form a small, careful plan, slip in under darkness, retrieve Needle, slip away. But that was a problem for later. For now, she had to focus on the bigger purpose, re-establishing House Stark's presence in the north. Over the next few weeks, life continued as before. Arya sulked at times, training harder with a spear and short blade. She joined the Crannogmen in fishing expeditions, surprising them with her accuracy in using a simple harpoon to catch eels. Derek busied himself helping maintain the hidden boats used by Reed's scouts. Catelyn pored over new letters as they arrived, cryptic messages indicating that some houses had responded favorably to the idea of a Stark revival. Mormont's answer was bold, praising the she-wolf and her mother for surviving. Glover's letter was more cautious but sympathetic. Tallheart was noncommittal, uncertain. There was no word from White Harbor yet, nor from certain other lords. Every scrap of encouragement buoyed Catelyn's spirits, though she knew it would take time for any of these lords to act. Winter was nigh, and the Boltons watched vigilantly. Finally, one drizzly morning, a scout returned from the eastern roads. He brought word. Rumors around the salt pans indicated a group of brigands indeed roamed the outskirts, led by a handful of former Lannister soldiers. They had a notched blade that might match the description of Needle, though no one was certain. The outlaws preyed on travelers passing through, extorting coin or goods. Some had been killed. The place was in disarray. Arya's face lit with a mix of anger and excitement when she heard the news. So it might be him. Let's go, Mother. Catelyn bit her lip. She had half hoped the rumor would prove baseless. Howland Reed's expression was grave. He addressed Arya gently. Even if it is Polliver, they're a band of murderers. It won't be a simple matter to stroll up and request your sword back. Arya's eyes shone fiercely. I'm not asking politely. I'll kill him if I have to. Catelyn's stomach lurched, hearing that resolve. But she looked to Howland. Could you spare a few of your best scouts to travel with us? A small group might slip in, handle the outlaws quietly, and slip out again. Howland studied them thoughtfully. I can spare 2 or 3. But if they see us as a threat, it could become a pitched fight. These brigands might number a dozen or more. We'll do it carefully, Catelyn said. Arya, Derek, me, and a small escort. We ambush them if we must. But we cannot linger. If the Freys catch wind of our presence in the Riverlands, it'll be disaster. Arya straightened, determination radiating from her. We'll be quick. Get in. Get Needle. Get out. Catelyn suppressed the prickle of dread that warned her this might be a fool's gambit. She had promised Arya a chance. More than that, she sensed that retrieving Needle represented a step toward reclaiming Arya's identity. So she met Howland's gaze. Will you help us plan it? He nodded slowly, though reluctance shadowed his eyes. I owe you every courtesy, Lady Stark, and the child is dear to us as well. Let us prepare thoroughly, though. We mustn't leave anything to chance. They spent the next day laying plans. Howland selected 2 seasoned Crannogmen, stealthy fighters adept at infiltration, to accompany them. The route to the salt pans was charted, avoiding major roads and likely Fry checkpoints. Once near the area, they would gather fresh intelligence on the brigands' numbers before striking. Catelyn insisted that they keep the operation small. An entire troop would draw too much attention. Arya insisted on being allowed to fight if it came to blades. Catelyn's maternal instincts balked at letting her daughter face lethal danger, but she knew forbidding Arya would only cause friction or lead to Arya sneaking off alone. Derek, for his part, vowed to protect both Catelyn and Arya with his life. On the morning of departure, a hush lay over Greywater Watch. Fog clung to the water, ghost-like. Catelyn wore dark clothing of marshweave, her hair pulled back. Arya dressed similarly, though she strapped a small short sword to her belt. The Crannogmen ready to boat for them. Derek loaded provisions and weapons, muttering about the unpredictability of the weather. Howland Reed approached them on the jetty, his face lined with concern. He held a small pouch filled with healing herbs which he pressed into Catelyn's hand. This is no grand war, but a small strike, he said quietly. Yet sometimes small strikes can shape the future in unexpected ways. Go with caution. Return safely. Catelyn bowed her head, touched by his genuine care. Thank you, Lord Reed. We will be back soon. He inclined his head in farewell, then turned to Arya. You carry the wolf's blood, child. Temper it with wisdom. Your mother needs you alive. Arya swallowed, her eyes flicking to Catelyn. I will, she said simply. With that, they boarded the boat. 2 Crannogmen scouted ahead in a smaller craft while Derek helped pole them through the marsh. The swirl of mist closed in, and soon Greywater Watch vanished behind them as though it had never existed. Catelyn felt a twist of apprehension in her gut. They were leaving safety again, heading into the unknown. Yet she could not deny the flicker of excitement in Arya's expression, the sense of purpose this mission lent her. They traveled for days, retracing a path similar to the one Catelyn had taken when she first came to Greywater Watch, though they diverted eastward sooner. The Crannogmen were masters of stealth, guiding them away from Fry patrols and passing them through abandoned hamlets without incident. Nights were spent in hidden camps, each carefully scouted. Arya's restlessness showed in how often she asked about the brigands or tested her blade's edge. Catelyn tried to remind her to stay calm, that they would gather intelligence before acting. But she sensed the tension coursing through her daughter. At last, they neared the region known as the Salt Pans, a coastal town once known for shipping trade along the Trident's mouth. Now reports said it was partly in ruins raided by outlaws. On a gray, windswept afternoon, they hid their boat in a rush-choked inlet, continuing on foot through scrubby terrain. A briny tang laced the air, and gulls wheeled overhead, screeching. The crannogmen found a vantage point on a small ridge from which they could see the remains of the Salt Pans docks, charred piers jutting into a sullen sea. The settlement beyond was half deserted, with only a few battered buildings still standing. Smoke curled from what might have been an inn near the water. Derek scouted a collapsed barn, then returned, reporting that it was empty except for a few starved animals. People were scarce, likely driven off or hiding from the brigands. Late in the day, one of the crannogmen spotted a small band riding into town from the east, 7 men on horseback bearing mismatched armor. Catelyn's stomach clenched. That might be Polliver's crew. They watched as the men dismounted near the inn, laughing raucously. One carried a notched sword, brandishing it as he strode inside. Arya sucked in a sharp breath at the sight of the blade's distinctive shape. Her eyes darted to Catelyn, a silent plea. Catelyn swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding. "We'll wait until nightfall," she whispered. "We'll see if we can catch them unawares." A storm rolled in as evening approached, lashing the coast with cold rain. Thunder rumbled distantly and lightning flickered across the churning sky. The perfect cover for an ambush if they were careful. Catelyn, Derek, Arya, and the 2 crannogmen waited in the shell of the barn until darkness fell. Then, under the roar of the rain, they crept closer to the inn's sagging structure. Light glowed in the windows, revealing silhouettes of men inside, their voices carrying on the wind. Arya tensed, fingers twitching near her hilt. Derek touched her elbow, cautioning her to wait. They spread out around the inn, each taking a position at a window or door. The storm provided camouflage, the downpour muffling footsteps. Through the broken shutters, Catelyn glimpsed a grimy taproom, a single guttering lantern on a rickety table. 6 men lounged in raucous conversation, gulping from casks of ale. Another seemed to be tormenting a cowering figure in the corner, likely a local force to serve them. The notched sword leaned against the table. She heard fragments of cruel jokes, talk of plunder. Arya crouched beside Catelyn, eyes narrowed. "That's Needle. I know it. I'd swear on anything." Catelyn's heart pounded. "We have to be swift. These men are dangerous. Stick to the plan." Arya nodded, though her expression was taut with anticipation. One of the crannogmen signaled from across the yard, bowstrung, indicating that he had a shot lined up. Derek stood near the back entrance, ready to force his way in on Catelyn's signal. She felt her pulse thrum in her ears. Any misstep could lead to death. But they had chosen this path. She steeled herself. She gave a sharp gesture. In a lightning strike instant, it began. The crannogman loosed an arrow through the shattered window, catching one brigand in the throat before he could stand. Derek kicked the back door off its rusty hinges. Arya darted in behind him, moving low. Catelyn followed, short blade in hand, ignoring the spike of dread. The brigands shouted in confusion, scrambling for weapons. One lurched forward with a club, only to be skewered by a second arrow from outside. Derek faced another who swung a rusted axe, blocking the blow on his shield and countering with a quick thrust. Polliver, if it was indeed Polliver, grabbed the notched sword, eyes wild. Arya let out a feral cry, launching herself at him. He parried, snarling, "You again. The wolf girl." Sparks flew as steel met steel. Arya was smaller and had to dodge sideways to avoid being overpowered. Polliver cursed, striking out viciously. Rainwater dripped through the holes in the roof, making the floor slick. Arya nearly slipped, but she recovered, twisting free. In the chaos, another brigand rushed at Catelyn with a dagger. She raised her blade, heart hammering, stepping back hastily. He swung wide, and she slashed at his arm, feeling the jolt of steel hitting flesh. He howled, dropping the dagger. Outside, thunder boomed, rattling the walls. The crannogmen leapt in through the window, one brandishing a spear. Another brigand tried to flee, only to be struck down. Derek finished off the axe-wielder with a decisive stab. The inn's taproom reeked of blood and spilled ale, but the fight was not yet done. Arya and Polliver circled each other. The brigand spat curses. Lightning flashed, illuminating his scarred face. "Should have slit your throat at Harrenhal," he bellowed, lunging. Arya ducked under his blow, hooking his knee with her foot, sending him staggering. She pressed the advantage, driving her shorter blade toward his gut. He blocked, but the angle was off, and she sliced deep into his thigh. He roared in pain, dropping to one knee. Catelyn felt a stab of alarm, worried Arya might be overcome by the man's greater strength. But Arya's eyes glinted with deadly focus. She pivoted behind him and kicked his wounded leg out from under him, sending him sprawling. He tried to bring Needle around to defend himself, but Arya stamped on his wrist, forcing him to drop the sword. His eyes went wide. No, no, please. Arya tore Needle from his grasp. She stared at the blade, her face a tumult of rage and triumph. Polliver reached for a hidden dagger at his belt, but Arya saw and stabbed down without hesitation, burying her short blade in his chest. He gasped, blood bubbling on his lips, eyes rolling back. Lightning flashed again, highlighting Arya's grim visage as she twisted the blade free. Polliver collapsed, choking, then lay still. Breathing hard, Arya looked at the notched sword clutched in her bloody hand, Needle, the sword she had named as a child. She wiped rainwater from her eyes, tears hidden among the raindrops. Catelyn, trembling, stepped forward. Derek and the Crannogmen stood among the scattered bodies of the other brigands, ensuring no threat remained. The only sounds were the drumming of rain on the roof and Polliver's fading gurgles. Arya, Catelyn whispered, chest tight with a swirl of fear and sorrow. She had seen her daughter killed before. She knew Arya was capable of it, but witnessing it so close, so personal, tore at her heart. She reached out, covering Arya's hand with her own. You have Needle. Let's go. For a long moment, Arya stared at the sword, her breath ragged. Then, with an abrupt motion, she dropped the brigand's notched blade that was never truly hers and clutched Needle close as if it were a lost friend. She blinked away tears, chest heaving, and nodded. Catelyn gently pulled her toward the door. Together, they stepped into the storm-lashed night, leaving the carnage behind. Derek and the Crannogmen followed, silent and wary. The local man who had cowered in the corner did not follow, too terrified or shell-shocked to move. Outside, the rain drenched them, washing away some of the gore. Catelyn heard only the roar of the wind and thunder. She knew they had to flee quickly in case other brigands lurked or local garrisons responded to the commotion. She placed a hand on Arya's shoulder. Come on, she said gently. They withdrew into the darkness, hearts pounding. No one spoke until they reached the outskirts of the ruined barn they'd used as cover. Derek scouted ahead, confirming no immediate pursuit. Finally, Catelyn allowed herself a gasp of relief. Her limbs were shaking from adrenaline. She turned to Arya, who stood with Needle gripped tightly in one hand, rainwater streaming down her face. Are you hurt? Arya shook her head. No, she said, though her voice was raw. He barely touched me. Catelyn stared at the blood spatter on Arya's tunic. Lightning flickered, and for an instant she saw not a child but a warrior who had taken a life to regain a piece of her past. The mother in her wanted to pull Arya into an embrace, to cry over the tragedy that had made this necessary. But the moment's urgency did not allow for it. Instead, she rubbed Arya's shoulder. We did what we came to do. Let's go home. Arya nodded, exhaling shakily. Yes. Let's go. They hurried into the storm, guided by the Crannogmen's skill, slipping through muddy lanes and away from the salt hands. Needle was safe in Arya's grip, but Catelyn knew that while the sword might be a symbol of her daughter's lost childhood, the price paid for retrieving it was steep. Arya had killed again. Catelyn prayed that this vengeance would bring Arya some measure of peace, yet she feared it might further entrench the darkness that war had carved into her. They pressed on, the thunder rolling overhead, each step taking them farther from the salt pans and deeper into a future uncertain. When at last they reached the hidden boat days later, battered by cold rains and exhaustion, Arya still kept Needle close at all times, polishing and sharpening it whenever they made camp. She spoke little, eyes introspective. Derek tried gently to engage her, but she would only nod or shake her head, lost in her own thoughts. Catelyn watched over her daughter with a mixture of pride and sorrow. They had won a small victory, reclaimed a piece of Winterfell's legacy. But the cost was written in Arya's grim silence. By the time they slipped back into Greywater Watch, the Crannogmen greeting them with quiet relief, Catelyn could see that Arya carried herself differently. There was a new tension in her posture, a sense of quiet finality. She had taken back what was hers, but some part of her innocence had been further chipped away. Still, as they disembarked onto the marshy island, Arya looked at Catelyn and gave a small, trembling smile. You kept your promise, she said softly, reaching for Catelyn's hand. Thank you. Catelyn drew her daughter into a fierce embrace. They stood that way for a moment, the drizzle pattering on the wooden walkway, the distant calls of frogs echoing in the reeds. Whatever horrors had shaped their journey, they were together now, forging ahead with a renewed bond of trust. And while the North still lay under the Boltons' cruel grip and the Freys held the twins, House Stark endured. In that small triumph, under the gray sky of the neck, mother and daughter found a flicker of hope to carry them forward, determined that one day they would reclaim their home and right the grievous wrongs done to their family.